Hello, everybody. Today, Maya, namaste, fellow yogi, is in here. And we are all smiles right now, but we're going to go to some places that are quite harrowing. So just a disclaimer. Ash, I spoke to Maya for hours, and he did warn me on the phone that similar graphic content to the Darren Jeffrey story that many of you saw on the channel. So obviously our mission statement is, end the war on drugs, take all those resources, 2 trillion spent in America, God knows how much spent in this country, and go after the predators, stop throwing young people in jails for low-level drug offences. I'm not talking about traffickers, but from my experience, I saw jails full of low-level people with addiction issues. End all that, take all that money and put the predators behind bars. And I'm not talking little slaps on the wrist either, where they just get 2 years and 5 years and they bring these high-priced lawyers in like we see with the Catholic priests. Talking proper, big sentences, because when someone gets out after 2 years and gets on with their life, how does that make the victim feel? The victim has gone through these things that they're carrying for the rest of their lives. It's completely unjust for these guys to be getting passes for these horrendous crimes. And the whole justice system seems to be absolutely upside down. And if you're not part of our mission statement, if you don't feel that is correct, then perhaps Maya here is going to help you change your mind. So, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome as well. Please tell us then just what life was like for you as a kid growing up.
Where do you want me to start?
What part of the country?
Okay, Essex. Proper Essex girl. Proud Essex girl, despite not living in Essex constantly, but very proud Essex girl. And just your typical Essex girl, I guess.
And how did your parents meet?
That was I don't know the ins and outs of how they met, but I know that my father was serving in the army, so he was working in the army, for quite some time. That's as much as I've probably ever really known about the history between them both.
And what years are we talking about when he was in the army?
No, I think it was around 1970s. He was 1973. And I was born around 1983.
1983.
So, yeah.
Right. So what was it like in school for you?
Oh, school was okay. I was there. I survived. But it was just a place.
Yeah.
But it was actually a place of safety. School was. Yeah, it was hard.
And did you find it easy to make friends?
No. I'm the outfitter. I've always called myself the outfitter.
And what do you mean by that?
I just don't fit. But I think when you've come from a background of so much trauma, you never know who you are anyway, because you don't know your own identity. So I think that's a lot of it.
Were you able to make friends with other kids, perhaps, who'd been through stuff or who were being left out of the main social groups?
No, I was always trying to be the cool kid. Right. I was always trying to be the hard nut. The girl that, would protect everybody. I was a bit of a fighter at the time.
So you were sticking up for people who were getting bullied?
Yeah. I came from a background of violence in my household. The way that you survive is you fight.
Yeah.
That's how you get anywhere in life, is you're aggressive and you fight.
When did the violence first begin in your household?
From the backstory from the police, around 4 years old.
And was that violence like your dad beating up your mum, or your dad picking up on you, or?
That was child sexual abuse.
Okay, so What was it you could first remember then about things?
Do you know what, Shaun? I think over these last few years, since his release from prison, I've been able to piece a lot more together. And obviously my story is very different in the sense that my child sexual abuse started very early. And I can remember certain bits of it, things like always waking up downstairs with the cartoons on and my father beside me, hushing and that kind of thing. And I think as I got older, I blocked it out And actually, as the police would sit and say to me, is it just become a normal part of my life. It was so normal that, you know, there was times where I was being sexually abused and I'm eating food or taking a phone call from a mate at school. It was that normal, that the body was there and the mind was just completely somewhere else.
Okay, so how long did it take then for the police to get involved?
Well, so my story is, long story short, is...
Okay, so we don't want people to do long stories short on this channel. We've got hours to fill.
Okay,
so we like to keep long stories long.
Yeah, I mean, I'll work backwards, actually.
Okay.
Because I think trying to address it from a child has always been extremely complicated.
Yeah.
Because the whole story is so complicated.
Okay. However you want to go with time
work
order.
backwards.
Go backwards then.
So I work from when I got the phone call in 2011. So we're talking, what, 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. So in 2011, I was on holiday. Well, actually, I was visiting my husband's family. So, and I'd had my first child, and that's when I got the phone call from the police. So I'm on holiday. So the story is my father stayed in my life despite he was my offender. He was my sexual abuse offender. And it's to the point where I kind of lived a double life. So I hated him, but at the same time I wanted the happy ever after. I can have a normal life and I can have the fairy tale. And so I kept him in my life. And then in 2005, 2006, we all went on a family holiday to Egypt. It was for New Year. And it was a holiday romance. I fell in love with the guy that was working in the hotel.
Who all was on this holiday with you?
So that was me, my auntie, my mum and my dad.
Okay, and I know we're going backwards, but was your mum and your auntie aware of what had happened?
Nobody. I say nobody was, as far as I was concerned. Although family members had suspicion of his character. I mean, he was very well known, very violent, always fighting with local, areas, lots of history, very protective, always people saying that guy's not right. Growing up throughout school, mates would be, he was well known in the sense, oh, your dad's round the corner stalking you. The dad in the white van, because he was a builder. So he was well known. So I'd never disclosed my child's sexual abuse at all to anybody, as far as I'm consciously aware. Maybe, in different parts of growing up, people got suspicious. So I kept this kind of like family dynamic, but at the same time always being very aware of the relationship between him and I, and that he is was sexually abusing me and was my offender. So in 2006 we went on holiday. It was a family holiday, and I fell in love with who now my husband. And for me at that moment of time, I was my late teens. My father, in my head, had stopped sexually abusing me, but he was a serial stalker.
Of you?
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like when I hit my teens, I moved out of home around 15, very quickly moved out of home, started house sharing with mates. But he was known as, everybody would be like, oh, your dad's sitting outside stalking us again. Your dad's outside stalking us again.
My goodness, I've never heard anything like this.
Yeah. And everybody knew him, the white van man.
The white van man? I
Yeah.
thought you were joking earlier.
No.
That was just like sort of a movie.
No. And like when I'd go clubbing with my mates, because, you're 16, you're trying to get into the clubs and everything. And my friends would cover me up and be like, your dad's sitting in the car park, quick, get into the club. It was like everybody knew what this man was. But it was always put down to he's overprotective. So everybody would be like, you've got a really overprotective father. So my friends I'd go and stay at their houses so that I could go clubbing, because I was never allowed to have that kind of lifestyle. So I'd be like, I'm staying at my mate's house tonight, staying at my friends. And my friends' parents would cover for me too. And there was so many times where he'd knock on their door and say, I want to see her. And my friend's mum would be like, no, they're in bed now. I'm not going to go and wake them up. So there was this dynamic. Talking back to friends and parents of friends since he was arrested, have said we always knew there was something, but we didn't know what. And he was that type of guy that was really weird, and some people would even say creeped me out, but was always put down to being the overprotective father that was just too overprotective.
This is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you go on holiday.
Yeah, so go on holiday. So 2006, fell in love with my now husband and kind of like used that as a way to be like, I can have a life.
Did you say you were in Spain, was it?
Egypt.
Egypt.
Yeah. So fell in love. Again, my father being so obsessed with me created hell on that holiday, because he'd seen that I'd got this attraction for somebody. So he tried to stop it and was like...
How did he try to stop it?
But he'd beat me and lock me in the hotel room and be like, you're not going out down to the club tonight, And I remember my auntie being like, actually going to him and saying, she's adult in a sense, She's 18. You can't beat her and you can't lock her away from just living a life. So there was always, people kind of always knew, but either didn't want to address it, or the very common... we're going to just brush this under the carpet because... Was
he an intimidating figure? Was he like big or was he aggressive?
He was not big, but he was intimidating in the sense that when we grew up in a council estate in Southend-on-Sea, and he was always fighting with the locals, so he was very violent. Him and his brothers, my uncles, were kind of like a little clique. So they was always getting into fights. They was... yeah, very violent. Everybody knew of them. Everybody knew the Colby family name. It was very much the violence. But he is the serial manipulator. So although he wasn't a rich family, he would use money. So he was always taking everybody on holiday. He was always paying for everything. So people who I talk to now would say, kind of hated him, but then felt controlled by him. Because even on my wedding day, he paid for everybody to come for my wedding.
It's like on a much smaller scale, but like Epstein just had so much money. He just bought everybody.
Everybody. And kind of bought their silence. I mean, there was a close family member who didn't have much money, was constantly paying. Every time she had to struggle with the bill, he'd pay. The money was, although we weren't rich, but there was always the flow of money to be able to silence. So he was that good cop, bad cop. People knew he was violent, knew there was something wrong, but because he would give you money, help you, he'd be your hero when you needed him. If anyone needed anything locally, he'd be the first person. I'll come and help you. Very much like that. So it was very... And I always remember people would be like, oh, your dad's so lovely, like he's so helpful. And I'd be like, no, he's not. He's not. He's really not. Because obviously I knew the other side to him. But then other people would hate him.
So you're on holiday in Egypt, you've been beaten and told to stay in your room. How is that affecting you psychologically then, that you want to meet, you've met the love of your life, you want to get out of that room? What are you planning in your head?
Well, I mean, that's a whole different story, to be honest, the whole holiday romance. But where you just know that you've met someone that would be able to handle... Because I was always, when I was growing up, I was always conscious of that. Whoever I met to have a family with would need to be able to handle this man and the weird dynamics of my family as a whole. My mother being, so cold-hearted and not having a good relationship with her. The father that literally stalks me. So interestingly, I'd fallen in love, holiday romance, and wasn't able to see him. Anyway, we were going home. The night before we were going home, They were putting on a big party for everybody, for, you know, the guests that were leaving, because it's proper, like, entertaining hotel. And as I walked past him, I slipped him my phone number on the back of a little card. And we were literally going home when I slipped him my phone number, literally. The coach was outside the hotel waiting to pick us up. So it was just that, pop my number in his pocket.
Can I just pause you 1 second?
Yeah.
You've described brilliantly, like, the number thing, but what led up to that? Like, how had you actually met this person?
I'd just been eyeing him up across the beach and eyeing him up across the room.
And had he been giving you the eyes back?
A little bit,
Yeah.
not a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an all-inclusive hotel, right? So they were the entertainment. They were what they were called the animators in the hotel, yeah? So there's a big group of them. He was part of the animation team. And so obviously he was like entertaining the guests. You know, he would do the volleyball on the beach. And then in the evening, the fakir shows and the fire shows. You know, he was one of those.
Yeah.
And so I was always getting that wind of him. And then when we were going to eat, because we had set times for all-inclusive eating in the hotels, he'd, you know, be lining up for his food. So I'd do a little sly, you know, little sly look. Because I couldn't speak to him, because my dad had got wind of it and was doing everything in his power, as he'd always done previously, leading up to any success that I wanted or anything I wanted in my life. He would stop it, you know. And so I had that going on as well. But yeah, so I slipped in my phone number slyly as I got into the coach.
Was your heart going when you did that?
Yeah. And then I got in the coach and cried. Because it's like, I'm going home now. I've just lost the love of my life. So I was probably, you know, that young kind of, I've fallen in love, and, you know, that was the moment. And literally cried on the coach trip to get onto the plane. Did the plane journey and literally switched my mobile on, and he was ringing me.
No shit.
Yeah.
Did you have people around you so you couldn't?
Yeah, I couldn't talk to him. I was like, oh my God, you know that God moment.
The texting began.
Yeah. And then that was that, really.
Do you remember the first texts?
Yeah, because the first thing he said was, I love you. We'd never even met each other. He had great language, bless him, but it was like that for me, like, I love you. And so, so the texting began. And
what was your response to that?
It was like, chill. Like, he slipped me my number. Calm yourself, chill your beans. And then, so we then started having these phone calls, and bless him, because obviously he'd worked as an animator in the tourist industry. So he had a good level of English. But the phone calls would be hilarious, absolutely hilarious. And so we spent, just connecting on the phone. And at the time I was working in a secretary firm, in a criminal firm, actually, defence, as a legal secretary. And like I said, the dynamics of between me and my father was everyone who knew me knew about him. And it was interesting because I said to my boss, look, can I take some time off work because I want to go back to Egypt and visit this guy that, you know, I think I've fallen in love with. And he actually gave me some spending money. I think it was coming to that point of my life where everybody around me who couldn't protect me wanted me to be safe. But I never really knew. I thought in my head I'd made myself safe, but I hadn't. So I went back to Egypt on holiday. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So I'm in Egypt, back in the same hotel in Hurghada, and the person, my husband, who had come to visit, wasn't allowed to come near me. And I'm thinking...
Wasn't allowed by who?
By his boss, by his team. And I'm thinking, maybe it's because it's going to affect his job. But I was being watched by security constantly. So me and my friend had gone on holiday. I'm old enough age to be travelling. And it was interesting. Yeah, so anyway, I kept saying to my mate who we were on holiday with, I'm not getting any chance to speak to him. I'm not getting a chance to be around him. And why are these security constantly around me? And she was like, I don't know, but it just feels really uncomfortable. Anyway, the night that we'd agreed to meet, me and him, I got called into the directors of the hotel's office and had the security behind me, and they said, can we have your passport? So I said, absolutely. You know, what's going on? So I handed them my passport, and they said, oh, you're not under 16? And one of our team is not trying to abduct you? I was just like, what the actual heck is this? Your father's made a phone call to the hotel that you're underage and that he's extremely concerned for your safety because we have a member of staff, my future to be husband, trying to basically abduct you. You can imagine me, Shaun. I was just like, this enough is enough, you know? So I went straight back to my hotel. I didn't care how much the phone call was going to cost me. I phoned him and I was going crazy down the phone to my father saying, you know, don't think I'm never coming back from Egypt. You ruined it. You know, let me be free. Is it not enough? The control and everything that you've done to my life, is this not enough? And he was just like, I'm sorry. I was just worried about your welfare and this. I'm like, so obviously what had happened is because of that call, my future to be husband was not allowed to come near me. Because obviously they were just like, what is going on? What is going on? Anyway, I said my husband weren't going to give up. So we agreed to meet after like working hours, and he was like, right, you're going to sneak off down this alley, like meet me here and I'm going to meet you here. And it was just like, what the heck? Like, I'm a grown, you know, I'm an adolescent, I'm a teen, you know, what is going on here? And anyway, he said, oh, we're going to go out for the night. It said like just down into like the city, and so my friend came and one of his friends come, so it was all safe and whatever. Anyway, I'll never forget, we were sitting in the taxi and he goes to me, I genuinely really like you. I think I've fallen in love with you. He goes, that connection that we had on that kind of that flowing meeting, he's like, it's like we're soulmates. He said, but what the hell is your father? What is this with your father? Well, obviously knowing in my head that who my father is, what he's done to me, never been, it's not out there. Nobody knows about it. I've covered his secret as I'd sworn I would take his secret to the grave, you know. I did the whole, he's just a really overprotective father. And, you know, I need you to understand that and explain. And he was such a good guy. He was like, I get it, you know, these visa stories, these women that get abducted and these girls and that. And he was like, oh, that's really sweet, actually, that he's trying to protect you. And then that was that moment where I'm like, don't like him. Like, I want you to have a normal family, but at the same time, you can't get too close to this man. So that's kind of how it all started, really. But him being very much aware from that moment of time that I'm entering into something very different. But of course, just the overprotective father. So came back to England. My husband then got moved to a different hotel because he got into so much trouble because obviously we found out that we were meeting up after work, etc. He got into a lot of trouble. He was moved to a different hotel in Cairo. Again, influenced by my father. Because once I'd got home to the UK and told everybody that I had fallen in love and I wanted to go and meet him again and I wanted to go back on holiday and I wanted to see where this was going to go, crap hit the fan. My father was like, this is not happening. So everybody was trying to stop it. Everybody was saying that I'm making a big mistake. I'm ruining my life. I could be adopted. You know, all of that typical stuff, that visa-y stuff that's going to happen. So he'd done some back-end phone calls. And next thing I know, my husband's ringing me from Cairo, from complete different phone number. And he's like, your father's really overprotective, isn't he? I was like, what's happened now? It was just constant. And it was like he was set out to stop what was going to happen. But he couldn't stop it. So, yeah, he was moved to Cairo and he said, like, I'm literally losing everything. It's, you know, my job, everything is for, you know, you better bloody well be worth it kind of attitude. You better be like planning something quite serious because I've just been shipped from, you know, and he was working in a, you know, a Hilton hotel, 5-star in Egypt. He was a top animator. Everybody knew him. You know, he was one of the best, you know, flamethrowers and all of that stuff, you know, where they stand on the glass. And he was one of those. So he was like proper, you know, in a good position. And he's like, I've just been shipped to Cairo because of whatever your father is getting up to. So at that moment, I just thought, seize the moment, seize the opportunity to just get away, to get out of England and to try and have a happy life. So my boss turned around and said, you know, I'll give you 6 months, however you need. Don't want you to leave, but understand what you need to do. And at the time, my husband was like, well, I'm kind of losing my job now, so I'm going to go back to Tunisia. So that's where he's originally from. And he said, what are you planning? And I said, I'll come to Tunisia. I'll come for a month. I've been given a month off from my boss. I said, I'll come for a month. We'll spend some time together and we'll just see what happens. And I never came back. Never came back. Well, I did eventually, obviously, because that's where the story then gets deeper. But so, yeah, went to Tunisia. Normal holiday, romance, new honeymoon period. We lived the life, beach, partying, just fantastic. And then my husband proposed to me. And
did he not know still at this point?
No.
Okay, and how long before, from when you met him to when he proposed?
So I met him in 2006 and he proposed a year later.
Okay.
About a year and a half later. So he said, traditionally, I need to ask your father.
No.
And I'm thinking, look, we're in Tunisia right now. Like, they're in the UK. We can just do this. But interestingly, my father's a very, very clever man.
Uh-oh.
And he'd come on holiday to meet him with my mum. And he tried to kind of put fear into my husband. And I'm very blessed.
What did he do to do that?
Just tried to show like he's aggressive, he's violent, and, try to put fear into my husband. My husband, I'm very blessed, is a very solid, strong, mentally minded man. And wasn't fazed by him at all, wasn't fazed by his aggressive approach. I'll never forget when they turned up in Tunisia on holiday to meet my to-be husband, and so aggressive and like shaking his hand, like trying to scare him, all of that. And my husband just was not fazed by it. So he's very clever, because then he turned to be his best friend. So all of a sudden, they were getting this bond. And my husband was like, your dad's amazing, your dad's lovely.
Oh, no.
Right? Now, this is where it gets interesting, because living in Tunisia, I couldn't get a job. But I didn't. So my husband's family were helping my husband and I to live. And who else was helping us to live?
Your dad.
Was constantly sending us money, helping us to live in this country. So obviously my in-laws loved him, thought he was just absolutely amazing. And I then eventually managed to get some work in a tourist area as a teacher, as an English teacher. But obviously was still heavily reliant on our families to support us. And then when my father was coming on holiday, he was flashing his cash constantly. So, yeah, my husband asked him for, saying that he was going to propose. And my father was like, yeah, whatever kind of thing. Because obviously we'd been living in Tunisia for nearly a year now. So leading up to the wedding, that was where I think my husband started to think something's not right. Now, my husband had come from a beautiful family, your normal, loving, non-violent family. So leading up to the wedding, my parents came over to stay with us in where we were living in the tourist area, in our apartment. And they came to stay, and I'd had an argument with my mum over my wedding dress. Normal, typical things, right? That getting stressed. It was a different country. We were planning to get married in a different country. It was all, but my parents were staying in our apartment, and we'd let them have our room, and we were sleeping in the front room. And there was one night where my husband said he'd opened his eyes, and my dad was just lurking over the top of us.
No.
And he said it just was just kind of a bit like, "You right, Ed?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, I can't sleep." And he was on the balcony having a cigarette. And my husband said, just that moment of just, that's uncomfortable moment. So this was whilst we were doing the wedding planning. Anyway, like I said, I'd had an argument with my mum. Can't even remember what it was, either the bridesmaids' dresses or the wedding dress or something. I can't even remember now exactly what it was. But I then started arguing. I said something to my mum and had an argument. And next thing, my dad was battering me in my apartment in front of my to-be husband. And he's on top of me and he's smashing my head in. And my mum's just sitting there all cold and going, this is why you shouldn't be marrying her. You're going to learn what she's really like. She is nasty. She is this. She is that, to my husband. And obviously my poor husband has never seen anything quite like it and felt so torn, because it's like, that's my father-in-law, but that's my future wife. And my father-in-law is beating my wife right now, and her mum's doing absolutely nothing about it. So he's like trying to pull him off of me and trying to separate us. So obviously I'm then saying, get out of the apartment, get out, like, go. So they've started packing up their suitcases because they still had a couple of days left of their holiday. And my mum's going, we're going to go and stay in the hotel at the airport and we're going back to England. Da, da, da. So I'm letting them go. And my husband's saying, you can't let them go. They're your parents. Like, it's just really stressful. There's so much going on. It's the wedding and I don't know what I've just seen, but they're your parents. And because he's so culturally bound by their family system, I'm turning around saying, let them go. I don't care. This is normal for me. This is what I'm used to. But for him, it was just so unbelievable. So anyway, as they're leaving to go, because they'd hired a car to put their luggage into the car, my husband's chased them down the stairs to make them stay. Now, unknowingly to me, Shaun, at that point, he'd then got a hernia. He'd ripped himself trying to run down the stairs. All right? But I didn't know this. So this was like 2 days before they were due to go back, or 1 or 2 days before they were due to go home back to England. And he's talked him round to coming back to stay in the apartment. He's just like, we've got 2 more days left. Emotions are high, da-da-da-da-da, So he's talked him back to coming back and staying in the apartment.
Oh no, this is going to get worse.
Right. Well, it was just another 2 days of hell, Did
he try and beat you again?
No. Because he'd seen that actually my husband was going to protect me. And that actually there's this man that's coming into our life that, as much as he's completely confused and, never been put in this situation before, seems to be able to be handling himself, which was very uncommon growing up. Anyone, that I got close to me in my life, even friendship-wise, he'd get rid of them, So, yeah, they then... when we had to play Happy Families for 2 days. And thankfully it was only, I think, 1 day or 2 days. And we was at the airport saying goodbye to them. And literally, as they went to walk through, to go into their plane, my husband just collapsed on the floor.
What?
And I'm living in a country where I can't speak the language. And I was just like, what? And he was like just holding, and... got him in a taxi. Lucky enough, he was still able to speak. Got him rushed to a hospital. And, he was having an emergency operation because, the hernia was so severe. And that I think that was the start to my husband being very confused by the family dynamics and by this man in particular. Got married. Again, all the family came. He paid for a lot of them to come out to Tunisia. And just a very weird, warped wedding, if I'm honest. Extremely warped. Very weird.
When you say warped, what do you mean by that? Like the energy?
The energy, just the way he is. I mean, when my story went out publicly in the press, they've used one of my wedding pictures where I'm looking down at him and he's, getting assault in my dress, and you can just see the hate in my eyes towards him. Because despite, as I thought, the abuse coming to the end, he was still touching inappropriately. He'd touch my bum or he'd touch my body. He still felt like he owned me.
I was going to ask that earlier. It sounds like it's an ownership thing with him.
Yeah.
He's never going to let you go.
No. So, even when we were on holiday for my wedding, it was still very much that cooping me around, places that touching. That's still very much that, although you're getting married, you're still owned by me.
Did your husband pick up on that?
He just picked up on the weirdness of everything, the weirdness of the situation between us, the love-hate relationship between us. He just picked up on everything. But we then went on to, have a lovely, first year of our marriage. And I kind of thought, yeah, that's it now. We're living in Tunisia. I'm now married. I'm now, with, somebody else, protected by somebody else, and I can rebuild. I can start my life. And then I fell pregnant with my first son while I was in Tunisia. And I phoned my parents to tell them that I was pregnant. And they were over the moon. My father was over the moon. And I then suddenly turned around and said to my husband, I can't have a girl. And he was like, well, it's not up to you. It's the fate of God. Like, it's not your choice. And I was like, no, I can't have a girl. Like, I can't have a girl. I can't bring a girl. Because obviously I'm aware that what I'm a girl, my father's manipulation, control, just, the constant inappropriateness, the touching and the just knowing constantly. I was like, I can't have a girl. So I remember going and having a scan because it was, I was living in Tunisia, so you can pray privately. So it was really cheap. Went and got a scan and they were like, you're having a boy. Yes, I've protected my future child. So I phoned up my father and he just went, you what? No, you can't have a boy. No, you need to have a girl.
Holy shit.
And I was like, well, I'm not. I'm having a boy, And I was so happy that I was going, I'd done this. So progressing forward, I got really ill in Tunisia. It was my first pregnancy. I was really, really ill and we had to make the decision to come home. Well, obviously we'd been living in Tunisia and I was like, right, so I need to apply for your visa for my husband. You need to come to England and we need to have the baby back in England. I'm just too ill and I need to be back home. So my parents were like, you have to come and live with us. And I'm heavily pregnant, very, very ill. And my father's then sponsored my husband for his visa. Because obviously the visa, the way it's working and the fact that we were going back to a country and how were we going to work, how were we going to provide for ourselves. So he became the sponsor. So I came back to England about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks before my husband, because he needed to sort his visa and everything out in Tunisia. And it was at that moment, I think, that I just thought, you've just got us all now. Because I've got to come home and live with you. You've just helped sponsor my husband to come into the country. You've literally just gained your full control of all of us. So I came back to England and obviously I was living with them. And normal as I believed, pregnancy. My husband came and they were all lovely to him at the beginning. And then I think that was the real changing point for my husband, living inside this house, was all of a sudden was like, there is something really not right with this family. But couldn't talk to me about it because obviously I'd never spoken to him about it. And I remember saying to him when we were planning to come back to England, I said to him, don't like him. Be very careful of him. I know you like him, but don't ever be so naive around him. It's like I was constantly warning him, but he was just like, what the heck is wrong with these people? They are insane. Like, these people are crazy, Yeah, but I think when he then came, that was the turn. That was the moment where he was just like, this is not a normal family. Not a normal family at all. So I gave birth, and I had a very, very traumatic birth. I was left paralysed from my first child, so I was needing a lot of care. And
paralysed in a particular part of the body?
In my leg.
So that means you couldn't walk properly, or?
No, and I couldn't care for my first child. So my husband and my father became the carers to my first child. And for anybody else, having a granddad that was that caring would have been extremely, you're so lucky. In my head, I'm thinking, no, I can't have you attached to my child. So anyway, we were living inside the home, and it was a really hard time. And I was just starting to get better, and I was just starting to have my physio and to go into recovery. And it was very stressful and whatever else. And there was lots of tension in the family. And then I can't even remember how it happened, but then it ended up to be a massive argument between all of us in the home. And I remember just sitting outside and my husband and my father having a massive big argument and getting very physical.
Do you know
very
what that
physical.
was over?
Can't remember what it was over. Very physical. My father was very fine. They'd been falling out since the moment he'd come to the country and was living inside the house. That was it. There was just they were just constantly arguing. My mum was constantly arguing with me. It was just awful. And there was a moment when he turned around and he said to my husband, "That's my son," about my husband's son.
Whoa.
So my husband got up and he was like, "Get your stuff, get my son. We are leaving this house. I don't know where we are going, but we are leaving." And it was like, that was just a moment that was just like, no, we're not staying inside this home. And my husband was like, "It's not your son, he's my son, and I can look after him, and we don't need you." And it was just that defining moment of, okay, this relationship and this dynamics is really starting to get quite scary.
Yeah.
So we got out and, we had our own home. And then...
How did you get your own home so fast?
We had a really good, great friend and her mum who lived next door, but was neighbours to my parents for a very long time, helped us.
Wow.
She was just like, "I'm going to help you. I'm going to be your guarantor. I'm going to help you get you and your family where you need to be." So we didn't move far. We only moved down the road. But again, he still had that control. So, fixing, arguing, making up, fixing the family. My husband still being really confused, but saying, that's your family at the end of the day and it's all we've got. I've left my family, etc. So it was just such a warped, looking back, it was so warped and so dysfunctional. And just, so much going on. But when I look back now, but thinking to myself, but at least my sexual abuses are over. Yeah. And although I've got this really dysfunctional family going on, at least that had all been gone. And this is just the crazy part of my father that everybody knows and everybody has to get used to. And I think in a way my husband got used to it. He did get used to it. He got used to the dysfunctional family and the craziness and the violence, and the fighting and the arguing with my father. It just becomes sadly it becomes so normal then for him to be so ingrained in and cooped up in it all. And then, every time we needed something, it was always my father was coming to do it. If the car had broken down, my father was coming to fix it. He was just constantly the one that everybody relied on. And it just got to the point where I just couldn't take anymore. And I just said to him, "We need to move away from this area. I can't." We'd had so many arguments. Our marriage was, really struggling because my father was so heavily involved in it. And my husband was just at the point where I can't take this anymore. And I was like, I can't do it anymore. So we actually moved to Colchester in Essex. So, in our eyes, like a couple of hours away. But still being very controlled. And I think my husband's still having that, manipulation around him too. I'd go back every week on a Wednesday and take my son and spend the night at the house, so that they could see their grandkids. Very much aware that my son, needed to be protected, but no, and everybody just saying, "Oh, you're becoming like your father, really overprotective." And I'm like, no, because I always knew, I had this huge weight in the back of my head that I've got to protect my kid, because you just never know. But at the same time, it's a little boy, so I'm all right. So it wasn't long. Like I said, so my son was born in 2009. And then in 2011, we were going to Tunisia on holiday. So parents, could meet our son because he was only little. And my parents were going to France because we had a family member in France. So, yeah, that was it. So I was in Tunisia having a holiday. And we'd gone to, you know, like in Tunisia, they have like local hammam, you know, the scrubbing and all of that stuff. So we'd gone to one of them. And at the time, I wasn't a very spiritual person. I really was not spiritual at all. Lived life. It is how it is. Anyway, I don't know if you know much about the Tunisian culture or the Moroccans and the Middle Eastern culture and how they believe in like the evil eye and that.
No, please explain it so we have a full
Yeah,
understanding.
so they believe very much in about be careful about if someone's, you know, jealous of you or because they can put like what they call like an evil eye onto you, and so they wear like the hand of Fatima for protection, the 5 hands and all of that kind of thing. And I was just like, whatever, you know, I'm an ethnic girl, I don't care, I don't need protection, I can fight, I can handle myself, it's all fine, don't need no protection. And his mum, because lucky enough, I'd replaced the love that I never had from my mum with my husband's mum. She was like my mum, you know, she treated me like a daughter and beyond. And she was always worrying about me constantly, especially when I lived out there. I was young, blonde, blue eyes, you know, in a foreign country. I was never allowed out because she'd be like, come, you know, the men are going to try and talk to you. You know, she was just a beautiful, natural, loving parent that I found very hard at the beginning. But it was this one evening when we'd gone to this local hammam. And it's very traditional, and we'd gone into the water, and you know everyone's scrubbing and the salt water and everything, and I still didn't know the language very well at that point. Never really bothered to learn it, if I was honest. Or everyone just needs to speak English. It was very much like the Brit. You all need to talk English. I'm not going to learn your language. But something happened, and like I said, I'm not spiritual at that point. But now, as you look back and you reflect on life, and you think, wow, there was so much that led me up to this point that now, as a reflective, kind of informed person, I get it all. But at the time, it would have just been like, whatever. But basically, there was a group of like very traditional old women in the hammam, and they started chanting and working around me. So my sister-in-law just grabbed me out of the hammam and said, right, go and get changed, we're going. And I was like, that was a bit weird. And it felt weird. I was like, so I come out of the hammam, like women on one side, men on the other. We all come back together. We're all going to go and grab something to eat. And my husband's like, oh, did you like it? Did you like it? I was like, no, it was hell. I hated it. It was awful. What was it? What was that I just went through? And he was like, I don't know what you mean. And I said, I feel like something bad's going to happen. I said, like, there was this chanting thing going on around me. And he was like, oh, you have to be careful of women that are jealous of you. That evil eye and that protection and everything. So anyway, we went home. I still felt really weird about that whole thing. Anyway, went to bed, and at stupid o'clock in the morning, my phone rings, and I answer it, and it says, can you hear me? It was this voice, because I couldn't hear it. And I said, no, sorry, I can't hear you. Essex Police. Sorry? But I couldn't hear them. And this was the night after this incident had happened around this. I just knew there was something bad, but I didn't know what. And no, I can't hear you. And my phone was crackling and everything. My phone cut off, and I'm going to my husband, Essex Police, the police. Oh my God, like what's happened? And it was like instinctively, I didn't know what. I just knew it was really, really bad. So they then called the house phone to my in-laws in Tunisia. So I picked up the phone, and they've gone, right, you're safe. Your father's been arrested. And I've gone, I don't know what you're talking about, acting all like normal, because I don't, you know, I've never shared anything. What you're talking about, what's gone on? They went, we know everything, and you're now safe. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to say anything. We don't even need you for evidence. We've got it all. So do you know what I replied? Oh my God, why are you doing this to me now? Why are you trying to destroy my family now? You're too late. What are you talking about? And my father's going to kill himself if he goes to prison. And they went, we know that's what you believe, and that's how you've grown up to believe. He's not killed himself. He is in prison, and we need to get you home. You're now safe. I was just like, and I'm screaming. I'm like, I couldn't even talk on the phone. The phone just dropped, and I'm just screaming on the floor like some crazy girl. My husband's picking me up going, what's happened? What's happened? And I just remember saying to him, if you don't come back to England with me, keep my son here, because my son was only little, keep our son, I understand that you will never want to be with me, and I will give you my son. I was in that much of a mess. I was like, I'll give you my child. And he's going, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what's going on. So your father's been arrested. It's okay. And I'm like, for child sexual abuse of me. That was the first time I had to say it to him. And he just went, okay, I'll hold your hand and we'll get back on the plane and we're going home. So for a couple of days, I had to stay in Tunisia. And to be honest, Shaun, I don't remember anything. I don't remember how I washed, I remember his mum lifting me at some point, putting me in a shower and showering me down. I don't remember functioning. I just remember just being and just not being able to function. And I remember trying to call family members. Nobody would speak to me. And what was interesting about that was just before I'd got the phone call, I'd been messaging my father asking how France was going. And he'd been replying to me. But it wasn't him replying to me. Because the police didn't want me to find out that they'd arrested him because they were worried I'd never come back. And although they didn't need me, they needed me in a certain extent to, for the investigation. But the reason they had to phone me, as I found out, was because the press had tried to leak the story. And they'd said that, he'd been arrested for, I think at the time they'd said something about following a 13-year-old girl after school or something. And so they were worried and so they got that press closed down, but then they got worried that one of my friends may have seen it and would call me and say, your father's been arrested, it's in the news. So they made a decision from the police perspective that we need to ring her and tell her ourselves, because it could be that she doesn't come back to the country. And they were obviously very concerned about the cultural differences between my husband and I. He was an Arab man, and the all of that baggage that comes with it of how he would cope with it. And I think that was the opening of my story, because when I come back, I never imagined what I was going to find out. I thought it was just child sexual abuse when I was young, and I walked back into this absolute I can't even describe what I came back to. And I just remember getting on the plane, driving, because we'd picked our car up from the airport, driving to my parents' house and just walking in and just kind of breaking down. But then obviously the police coming to see me and the story just unfolding, and it was just so unbearable and so much information for me to take in. I couldn't physically take it in.
When you got to the house, was it your mum who greeted you?
It was my mum and my auntie and her friend.
And what was your initial reaction to them when you first saw them?
Just relief. Because I'd been trying to call them, and all they just kept saying is, we believe you, just come home. We believe you, just come home. But unfortunately, the reason they wanted me to come home was because some of them were being interrogated and investigated. So they actually didn't want me because they wanted to love me and nurture me and look after me. They actually needed me to get them out of trouble, because they were, being questioned for neglect and, on suspicion of how could this have all happened, because it became one of the most serious paedophilic crimes at that time.
So you've been greeted then by your family members. What happens next?
So just kind of talking it all out. And me, like I said, I'm going in the perspective of, I was just a kid, and, So then the police coming to see me and start unravelling. So basically what they unravelled was, so they're saying to me, we don't need you. And I'm like, why don't you need me? That's fine. And they were like, we have over 160 hours of video footage of your child abuse from very young up until you were date raped.
Oh my God.
So video footage. So what happened was they explained it to me. So they'd raided the house because they'd got a phone call that people were concerned that he was my father was a paedophile. And when they raided the house, they opened the room that he used, which was like a small office. And the police officer was waving to the police officer. So the police officer was in the bedroom that me and the husband, my bedroom that I grew up in. And the police officer was sitting in the office room in a computer screen, and saying, I can see you. And he was going, how can you see me in this bed, in this room? How can you see me? Don't know. Went into the other rooms, and every room they went into, they could see him. He had installed cameras in the light sockets of every room and had recorded for years absolutely everything. So they traced, when he looked up, the police officer said, yeah, I can see, you're looking at me. And he's going, I'm looking at a light bulb. Like, and then all of a sudden they were like, took the light down and the cameras were fitted. So they got up into the loft and they traced and tracked and got rid of, took all the lights out. So the video footage was just sitting there. And then they went downstairs and opened the drawers in the front room, and all the drugs were there. All the date rapes, all the ecstasies, all the drugs, the cocaine, everything that he used to use. And then I remember they went...
When you say he used to use, you mean on him, or he used to ply you with those drugs?
He used to ply me with drugs. Yeah. So where I was in my head believing that I was a child abuse survivor, victim, whatever you want to call it, from a young age, but when I had escaped at the age of 15, I was free. I wasn't. And I think that was the hardest thing to deal with, was actually knowing that he had been putting drugs into like my cups of tea and my milk every time that I'd been back there.
Oh my God.
So I think out of all of that, that was the most hardest to actually, because it felt like you were ripping away every ideal that I'd had, that I'd actually created a life for myself. And the more they were telling me, the more I was finding out that actually I didn't have a life. And so, yeah, and they went up in the loft and there was like a big shrine and all sorts. They found all sorts up there that was connected to my growing up and everything. So they had all this video footage that the poor police officers had to sift through, hours and hours and hours of it.
What do you mean by shrine?
Just pictures, just... They said it's like weird stuff, like there was just pictures and letters and just everything, but everything that like even I had done as a kid. So if I'd written to like in a diary, my diaries were there, like just everything was just up in this loft. And they said it was just the most creepiest, weirdest thing to have found. And the fact that, the fact that he'd done this video recording, and how, as they worded it, how clever it was, had it have not have been so sick. So there was lots of things unfolding. They then told me that he'd served a prison sentence in 1973 or 5, can't remember the exact date now, for rape of a young girl in the army. And I was born 10 years after that. But the story at the time, I confronted my family when the police told me. They said, "Were you aware of that?" I said, well, "Obviously, I wasn't aware of that." I said, "So we've got a convicted criminal, then, have we?" And they said, "He's got history. He's got records for a lot. He served time in the army. He'd been in a lot of trouble with bringing, I think it was what they said was bombs over from the IRA when they were fighting over in Ireland." They said there's history on him. So I just remember saying to my mum, like, you married a rapist and you're sitting here acting like you're surprised. But actually you're not surprised, are you? Because you married a rapist. And then she was like, well, your dad was violent. So what the police had tried to believe at the beginning, that she'd been manipulated by him and drugged by him too. But because obviously she'd been arrested. But it then came out that she was absolutely obsessed with this man and heavily in love with him, because she had written him a letter that they'd found saying, whatever you need to do, just do it, just don't ever leave me. So do what you want with the kids, but just don't ever leave me. And I remember going and sitting down and saying to her, like, were you really that infatuated by this man that you allowed your children to be beaten and sexually abused so that you could just keep him? And I said, and now that explains why you're so jealous of me and why you would always been jealous of me. And she was like, yeah, you took my love away.
Holy shit.
And it was just like... So that was kind of the start of me going, I'm not here to be loved and looked after. And I haven't got the mum that I was coming back from Tunisia hoping that she was going to say, oh my God, and I'm so sorry and I love you and I want to protect you. I wasn't getting that. And then things were just unfolding constantly about the prison and the army and all these different things. And it was like they were telling me about this man that just wasn't my father anymore. It just wasn't. And I remember them saying to me, right, we need to ask you this question and you don't need to answer, but can you remember anything so we can get some highlight on your age? Because this is what they said. They said the videos, they said, because they said, we've got a very intelligent man here, right? Fitting cameras and more, as we found out later on, getting some of the best drugs imported into the country for rape. They said, we've got a very intelligent man. So they said, he said, and some of the video footage, how you look is not matching the date on the video footage, because it's like old camcorders, so they had the dates and stuff. So they said, can you remember anything that can just give us a hint of how old you were when this first started? Because your father's claiming a mutual consensuous relationship. Incest, right? So I turned around and said, I described the only thing that I could remember I described. And all of a sudden, the police officer went white. I looked at my mum and my mum went, no, she can't remember that. She was too young. So I remembered and I described a flowery sofa that was in a house before the house that I grew up in. And that particular house had been burned down. And my mum's sitting going, no, she can't remember. She can't remember that, surely. And I'm like, and I described it. And it's actually the picture that's out in the press. And the police officer went, that's what you've just described. So I was 4.
Oh my God.
That was the earliest memory that I could describe, was around 3.5, 4. So, yeah. So as the plot thickened, and just, do you know what, Shaun? Every day the police were coming to the house. Every day there was more stuff. They're trying to find out if there was more girls, more people involved, if it was just me, if it was family, just trying to find out constantly everything. And it was really interesting. Well, it wasn't interesting, but I kind of just managed to be there to be involved with everything and just getting on with it. And it was like it was not really happening to me. It was like a completely different, surreal part of life. And it was interesting because they kept coming, you got to laugh, but it just wasn't funny. But at the time they were like, there was about between 100 to 200 keys. Now my dad was a builder, right? And they were going to the building sites where he used to work. And they were finding, because they were trying to, I don't know what they were looking for in particular, but they were trying to find more stuff. And then they were like, we've got a skeleton key. And I was like, what's a skeleton key? They were like, a key that could access all buildings. And they were like, was there any time? And I remembered this one time where I'd heard somebody in my flat. And where you think, oh God, I'm tired and I'm going crazy. And I was like, they were like, were there times where you could hear people in your home? And I was like, yeah, all the time. But I used to think I was going mad. I just had a newborn baby. I was exhausted. I was suffering with, mental health issues and trauma, etc. And they were like, he used to come into your home while you were sleeping. And I was just like, this is just getting too much for me to comprehend. And then the house that we were living in Colchester, the police came up and they went in every plug socket and got transmitters out. I I was like, is there anything else that we need to be looking for? So he was installing transmitters into the plug sockets and just listening to everything, I guess. Just he was just a part of the life, you know. So yeah, so there was a lot of evidence.
So, on the tapes, then, how many people were being abused on the tapes?
It was just me.
Okay. Did you say you had siblings?
Yeah, I've got brothers, just brothers.
So he went after females only.
Yeah, to a certain degree.
There was abuse of the brothers.
There was violence of the brothers.
Physical abuse.
Physical abuse. My closest brother actually moved out of the house very, very early because he was always being beaten by my father. My other brother, who's my half brother from a different father, he actually removed him because it came about that social services were involved in our upbringing, because there was a time where my father had put my half brother's hand on a fire and was burning it.
Jesus.
And so my mum had been compromised to say, like, he can't live with you. And she let her son go to his real dad. So, you know, he was a very nasty, violent character that just got away with it. And I said to the police, I remember saying to the police, did he want to get found? Because the evidence was everywhere, Shaun. You didn't have to look very far. You just had to open a drawer. You just had to put on the TV and the video footage would come out. He'd been watching it the night before we went to France. That's how they found it all.
Oh, yeah. How did they
Right?
get him?
Yeah.
How did they get
We've
him?
missed that bit, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of my family members was looking after the house to go in and water the plants. While people go on holiday, that's what you used to do back then, didn't you? You'd give the key to somebody and say, can you put my post in? Can you look after my stuff? One of my close family members, which I can't name, for protection reasons, got suspicion, to say the least, that the way he was acting towards my son was not quite right. Didn't feel comfortable with the overprotectiveness he was passing down. And how it all came about, I'm not going to say, because it's not for me, because I wasn't here. I was in Tunisia, so I've just got what I know of, and you know, everybody's got that side to that story that I'm never going to know. In honesty, I've tried to discuss it with people, and I'm never going to get what. From what I know, is this close family member who was in charge of the house at the time just got suspicion, went upstairs and pressed the play button on that TV, and he watched the rape and the abuse. Took the video footage, freaking out. Lucky enough, went to a family member, very close family member that wanted to protect, who would always has suspicion, and when we're calling the police. Other family members have tried to stop that phone call to the police because they wanted to cover it. We can deal with this. We're calling him in France. We're getting back. We can deal with it ourselves. I'm so blessed that this particular person, who I will love for eternity, said, no, get on, I'm ringing the police. So closed the doors, protected the house, and that's how the investigation started.
Was that video a video that he'd made recently, or was that from when you were very young?
Older. More early teens. So that's why they were then confused. That's why when they started raiding the house. So they couldn't let me get wind of it because I was in Tunisia. They couldn't let him get wind of it because he was in France. So the way to get him began for the police's side of it, which was keeping it all hush-hush, getting hold of the family members that wanted to ring him and making sure that they didn't do the deed, and then waiting for them to arrive back from France. And when they was on the coach, all the police following the coach and surrounding the coach. And then when the coach managed to do one of its stops, which they knew, was when they went on and arrested him. Yeah.
What was your conversation like with your husband then after all this went down?
I think he was. I can't remember much, but I think he was just so like you were a kid. You was an innocent little child, and having a son of a couple of years old ourselves, and him looking at him and like not being able to grasp that that was you, because the grooming started very, very young. Literally the minute I was born. In a sense, I was born for that. That's what I was born for. Because he'd had previous convicting history of he was in the ring, the dark, whatever they call it, the dark web. He was known as Teddy in that.
He was on the dark web?
Yeah, he was known as Teddy.
Do you know what groups he was in or anything like that?
I'm not 100% sure. They never disclosed much of that information. So he had his connections. And I know he had connections, good connections, or maybe not connections, but I know he's very clever. Because how this... they had the evidence. They didn't need me, but there was a lot of things that weren't matching up. Now, I was living in Colchester. I was going through a lot. My husband was trying to be as supportive as possible, but I spent a lot of time down at the family home. Anyway, I get a phone call from my uncle, and he says, "Did you get the letter?" So my father's on remand now in prison. I didn't get any letter from your dad. Letter? No. I've been to see your dad today, visited him in prison, and he got a letter to you. No, I haven't got the letter. So I put the phone down, shouting the phone to the police, and I'm saying, "What letter?" And they were like, "Oh, I'll come and talk to you."
Oh, no. What?
Right? Can you imagine me? Like, I don't want any more phone calls. I don't want to know anything else. Just let me live my life, please. So they turn up and they say, we didn't need to worry you because we got the letter from the rapist that was coming to your house to deliver it to you.
What?
He'd written me a letter, given it to whoever was serving with him to get it to me.
It was the rapist?
Yeah. In his wing. But don't worry, they said, because we've got the letter. We'll come and fit some panic alarms and you'll have, an alarm in your bag and whatever so that you feel safe. But can you meet us at the family home? Because the letter is what we needed. You not got enough? You want a bit more? So off I trot the next day, driving down to the family home, thinking, what on earth is this? And to be honest, pretty darn freaked out, pretty scared for my life at this point, pretty confused on how a man that's just been remanded into prison is managing to get, trying to get letters to me and God knows what else, when they were telling me, he's on a secure wing, can't access you, he can't get nothing to you, you don't have to worry, and all of this. Anyways, turn up at the house and police go running through the house, straight to the back of the garden. There's 2 sheds at the back of the garden. They go wherever they need to go and they get this black box out. And they open the black box. One goes to vomit. One takes what they need and they walk out. And I had no idea what it was. But the letter had said, not that I know it word by word, but I got the gist of the letter was asking me to burn what was in the box. Burn the box. So I was being asked by my father to burn the box. But obviously I never got that letter because they'd already got hold of it. However they got hold of it is a whole different story. But I was being asked by my father to protect him, to save him, and I'm sure it was all pleasant in the letter to burn the box. And I didn't get to burn the box, so the box was retrieved. So anyway, we're going on now. Life's, trying to deal with life, trying to deal with husband, trying to be a mum, waiting for the sentencing to happen. And I couldn't, it was like I I couldn't process the information, all of this information that was coming in, the lights, the transmitters, the keys, the that, the prison before. I just couldn't process all of this information, Shaun. And I just felt like I was going crazy. And actually, I think I felt like because of the dynamics between me and my father, him walking me down the aisle, him being a heavily part of my life, I guess, if I'm honest with you, is that I kind of needed I needed to see that I was a child, because I'm starting to get a bit like, what's going on in my life? Like, you know, and him writing me this letter to burn this evidence. It was all kind of like, you know, it didn't feel like, okay, this is a man that's been arrested for child sexual abuse, because it was becoming so, I don't know, like just so disgusting in a sense that he was actually writing to me to ask me to burn the evidence. And I'm thinking, what evidence, you know, what? So I remember calling, I had some fantastic police officers that I'd chosen to work on the case. Absolutely amazing. Can't fault them at all. And I remember saying to her, I need to come and watch the videos. Right? And
God.
Her saying, you've been so incredible throughout this whole investigation. Why do you need to watch the videos? So I explained why I needed to watch the videos. So she said, I've got to get this approved because you're in a really good place, stably and mentally, and we have to be safeguarding you to make sure that you remain in that place. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let it go. I needed to see, I don't know what I needed to see, but I needed to see something. So I got the phone call, yeah, you can come and watch some of the videos. Yeah. So I get in the car by myself and I drive to Brentwood police station, and I walk in and I'm like, I'm ready. And they're like, look, we can't show you everything. We can only show you some that we feel is appropriate. And I'd asked for some specifics. I just needed something. And so I asked for specifics of what I needed to see in order to be able to continue my life, Shaun, you know. So, yeah, I remember just sitting in the police station and she's going, are you ready? And I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. So I asked for 3 particular things that I needed to see. I needed to see that I was very young. And I needed to see and I needed to watch that I didn't, I wouldn't say agree to it, but I didn't allow it. Yeah? So I watched the first video, and I was in my little school uniform pinafore. You know, back in those days, we used to wear those little checkered, my little socks up to my knees. And I just needed something to know that I was innocent and I was a kid and I'd been groomed. So the one in particular they allowed me to watch because it wasn't quite as horrific as the others. Was me as a very small kid. And I will never forget. And I turned and said, are you happy with me now, Daddy?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And I had to watch it because I just felt like everything I was finding out so far out of my imagination that I needed some kind of perspective again. So I was very, very little and I watched that one. And then I said, I need to watch something where I can feel that I didn't just allow it. So the one that they let me watch, and I'm not going to talk too much about it. One, because I don't want to. But there was part of the scene where he had the video camera actually in his hand. And he was laughing and hackling and saying, "Are you ready? Are you ready?" And I've just turned around and I've said something that, yeah, I'm ready. And I've just booted him straight in the face. And I've started hitting him. And all of a sudden the camera just drops to the floor because obviously I've knocked it out of his hand. And it just goes black. And it was like, that for me, Shaun, was such a relief. That moment watching that was like, yes. There were times where I fought you and I tried to stop you because the way it was all unfolding, like this, literally like this crime scene was unfolding, it just was too much for me to try to understand where I played a role. Yeah. That, despite how, I don't want to talk about the graphics of it, was relief. That was, okay. There was a sense of me that went, seeing me as a little girl, groomed, so innocent and so pure, asking my daddy if he's happy now, to slightly older, attacking you where I felt I could. So I watched just some portions of them. And it was interesting because the police officer, she said to me, once you've watched these, they'd asked me to do like a statement to be read out in court. And I'd refused to do one because I was still of the mindset that he was going to kill himself, because that's what I'd grown up. If you tell anyone I'm going to kill myself, and she sat there and she was like, he's not dead, is he? He's been in prison now in remand for a very long time and he's still not dead. And I was refusing to do this statement, Shaun. So they thought, okay, watch the videos, then maybe you'd be wanting to do the statement. I still didn't want to do the statement. I just needed some clarification, some closure. So we were discussing it, because obviously, we're still talking about it. And she's like, are you okay? I said, can I go outside and take a break? She was like, yeah, absolutely. And then I went outside and I'd actually taken my mum with me, stupidly. She was just sitting there going, oh, how much longer is this going to take? Right? They're probably like the biggest, worst moments of my life. How much longer? So anyway, I went back in and I said to her, I need to know what was in the black box.
Oh my God.
Because I just couldn't give up, Shaun. And I think because of the way I've worked through this investigation with them, and I think because of how, I don't know the words for it. You look at child sexual abuse, don't you? And you hear all these stories about she got to 12 or 13 and then he stopped. She got to an age of puberty and it stopped. This is, I'm not saying that I'm not devaluing it. I'm saying, but it's kind of like that's the stories that you always hear. You always hear about it stops at a certain age. So you'll hear from an abuse survivor and they'll say like it was from the age of 6 to 12. But mine wasn't stopping. And it was just too much for me to comprehend. So I was asking for other things. So she started showing me some other things that really pieced my life together. So I said to her, what was in the black box? So she got it out. And it was a black diary. And the black diary is what got him to be sentenced, because it scored me for every rape and every abuse from 0 to 10. And he coded the drugs that he used on each day and each time. So he didn't leave me with very much in my life, and as well as quite degrading. So I was scored, and yeah, he initial like E for ecstasy times whatever. So it was a written account of everything. And this particular diary, there was obviously more diaries, but this one that they showed me matched up to what they'd been watching on the videos, etc. So everything, all of a sudden, it was just there in writing. There was no confusion. There was no, is that the date? Is this the date? Is that the age? It was just there. But the diary was just so in depth that he'd put like where he was stalking me, you know, and whose house I was in. But I think what upset me the most, which is quite ironic in light of the subject, was that the times where I thought he didn't know, he knew. Does that make sense? It's like where I thought, so like I lived in Tunisia and they showed me like emails that I'd sent to get a job and he had blocked them from getting to the job. He was hacking into all my emails. He was hacking in, you know, like he was a part of every single thing. And I think that actually, because the child abuse and what had happened to me had been blocked by the memory, that actually felt more painful than actually going through the abuse that I went through. Because I just looked at her and I said, so actually no point in my life did I have control of my own life. You know, and when I was sneaking to my friends thinking, I'd got away with that tonight, it was all part of the game. It was all part of I don't know, it's like the game that he'd played out, how he wanted it to be, that control, that thrill of manipulation, that thrill that actually she believes that I don't know. You know, and down to the diary was just down to everything. It just had everything in it. And so it was just his written account, which could never be denied in the court of law. So that was the evidence in total.
I'm going to ask you next what the conversation was like with your husband, but I'm just going to put my jacket on because I've started to feel a bit
getting cold.
I've gone very cold and nauseated.
Well, yeah. I mean, the conversations with my husband, you know, he doesn't listen to these parts when I do interviews. He won't watch them. He won't listen to them. He's never watched my Channel 5 documentary, and I'm glad, because, you know, there's some things that your husband wouldn't want to know to a certain extent.
I just want to say, because I'm just like I'm stunned right now. Actually, I just want to say how brave you are to insist on doing the things that you insisted on doing to get to the absolute bottom of it. And I'm sure, Jesus Christ, if anyone's watching this feels like me right now, then please put in the comments, you know, how you feel about how brave she is, because it's just mind blowing. It really is. Yeah,
and I don't even know where it all come from, Shaun, if I'm honest. You know, I don't know why I needed to know what I needed to know. I think it was to survive. Because I asked this to the police officer. I said to her, why am I so determined to know all this? She said, because, she said, how you survived. She said, because she said, you actually shouldn't be alive by the extremity of what happened. You should not be alive. She said, which is why in that video that you watched, where I'm on the phone to a mate from school whilst I was being abused, and I'm watching it going to her, I was laughing. She was like, I know why you're laughing. She said, because it's like, you couldn't, do you know what her parting words with me were, if you'd heard it if you'd watched or heard about it in a film, you wouldn't have believed it. But actually, you've lived it. That was her parting words the day that we parted after the court hearing, was, you wouldn't even believe it if you had watched it on a film, on a documentary or you know, she said, but you actually lived it. And I remember saying to her, you know, why do I need, what is wrong with me? You know, why am I trying to piece all this together? And she said, because to survive, you detached your mind and your body.
Laughing was a coping mechanism.
Yeah, but she said, and now what you're trying to do is piece the mind and the body back together. She said, and if you didn't have this information, what you're watching in front of you, she said, I would be in fear of your safety leaving this building. She said, but because of the way that you're addressing it, it was like I was watching someone down the road. I was just sitting there like, oh, wow. God, he didn't leave me anything, did he? And she was going, no, like, she was like, obviously knowing, working with me going, no. I was literally talking to her like I was watching it as a film of somebody else. And it didn't catch up with me until, I think, around 2013, mentally, when it caught up on me. So obviously watching all of this was before he'd been sentenced. Okay, so we're still in remand at this point of time. And obviously did the statement that they wanted me to do, because after the diary, the anger was just beyond. I think that before that, I was very protective of him, still scared and terrified that he was going to kill himself. And then seeing that diary was like, you are some seriously cold character.
Was that the moment where it detached you from that loyalty, the brainwashedness of...
Yeah, and I was still very much brainwashed right up until that moment. That moment was like somebody had just cut the knife, cut the cord and gone, poof.
Wow.
And all of a sudden I was like, I'll make that statement. And I'll say exactly what. Yeah, I was just, I don't know, it was just, and I think looking back, I'm so glad I did it, because I don't know where I'd be now that he's out in this world, living his life normal now.
Oh, we're going to get to that. That's going to just...
Right.
Yeah.
Had I have not been able to cut that cord, because I was very, very loyal and very groomed and very brainwashed and manipulated. And we all still were. All my family still were. I think even my husband to this day still struggles to even think about him as a bad person. It really is. It's so, dysfunctional still, because of how, I don't think anybody will understand the power that he had over people. So yeah, sentencing took place. Another drama in itself, that was, because it was I wanted to be in the room. And I was told that I didn't need to be in the room, and I said, no, I want to be there. And my husband was like, if you're going in, I'm going in with you. You're not going alone.
Would this be the first time you saw him eye to eye?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep, since the day I said goodbye to him, have a great time in France.
Did he just accept guilt, or was there a trial?
There was no trial. At the beginning, he was saying it was a consensuous relationship. And then I think he'd been given advice that once they'd got the black box and the evidence and everything, like, you've got no chance right now, so you need to plead guilty, basically. But he didn't feel guilty with, remorse or intent. It was purely like, save my backside, because I think he'd been indicating to family members that, I'm only going to get a couple of years. I'm just going to get like 2 years. I'll be out in a year. Like, don't worry about it, kind of attitude. So yeah, and obviously, the sentencing had been changed so many times. The dates constantly being cancelled and changed, and you name it. Oh, it was crazy. But eventually we got to the day, where we actually got in to go into the room, because there'd be times we'd go to court and we'd be sitting waiting, and they're saying, right, no, it's been changed, been rescheduled, whatever. It's the typical, stuff that happened. But yeah, I went in to the sentencing, and I sat there throughout it all.
When your eyes first met, what was that like?
Well, he came in behind me. So where we were sitting, he came in from the top. So the way that they'd positioned us was we were facing the judge. So there was like the seating area here, and the police were sitting here at the side, and the judge was in front. And then we had obviously the cameras on me to watch me, because the judge was he was an outstanding judge. And he was very conscious of not my stability, but he's very conscious of how I'd managed this whole entire process. that I think for many of them were quite shocking. It was as if they're saying, she's going to break at some point. When is she going to break? Like, this girl has been like, involved in the investigation. She's helped us with everything. She's come and sat in the police station. She, I was dealing with my mum's bills and phoning up people, telling them that he was in prison. Like, I was just literally leading, And I think the judge was concerned at like, which point is she going to break? And at which point have we got to safeguard, and protect her future? So the way that they'd positioned us was quite strange, actually. And so he walked in behind me and was sitting right at the top of the back of the room.
So he was positioned on a back row, was he?
Yeah, at the top.
Was he stood or seated?
Seated.
So he would be with his lawyer up there.
Yeah.
And then you were several rows in front.
Down, yeah.
You were at the very bottom.
Yeah.
And you had all the protection of people around you and everything.
And the police down at the side.
All lawyers.
So in order to see him...
You'd have to crank your head. And did you do that? And what was going through your head at the moment you did that?
I wanted to see my dad. I think I wanted to see that man that I could remember as a kid. Like, you're my dad, you love me. And I know you didn't mean to hurt me. I'm still... Because with child sexual abuse, you're still an adult living like a child, And there's moments where you go, what I call, into your inner child. You go back into your inner child self. And I think at that moment, because I remember holding my husband's hand and wanting to look at him and go like, that's my dad. And I just remember turning and looking up and seeing just this cold look in this man. I didn't even recognise him.
Was he looking at you?
Yeah, like just...
So there was eye contact?
Just like that. Just full-blown, angry, just cold face. And I didn't realise that my husband had also looked, but after me. So we discussed this afterwards, and I said to him, did you look at him? And he went, yeah, I did look at him.
Was your husband sat next to you at that point?
Yeah, he was sat next to me. And I said, what point did you look at him? And he goes, I can't remember at what point I looked at him. He said, but yeah, I looked at him. I said, and what did you feel? Like, did you feel that was the man that like has been in your life for all these years? And he was like, no, don't know who he was. And do you know what worried me, Shaun? Was I sat there and I thought, that's the unfiltered person.
The monster
doesn't
face.
Need to hide anymore.
Yeah.
And that scared me more than anything that I've ever been through in my life. Because it was like, I don't know who you are now. Because you haven't got that look of overprotective father. All of a sudden you've just sat there, a completely new person.
Did he pretend to be remorseful to the judge?
No. And I don't know what happened, because he had an opportunity to write a letter. I don't know if that's standard procedure. They get an opportunity before they go into court to say something or
you can
speak
say something
or
write a letter to the judge, or you can have people write on your behalf as well.
Right.
Did any family members stand up for him?
No.
Because if I had a brother and he'd done that, I would be the first to put a gun to his head.
Well, his brother was visiting him in prison right up until the day he's been released. But the judge did mention about the letter that he'd written him.
Okay.
And actually turned around and said, your letter was so vile that if I could sentence you to life, and actually worse, I would do that right now.
This is what I'm talking about. A good judge in a
had his hands tied
system,
yeah,
that wanted to give this guy life. He should have been doing life.
Yeah.
What is going on in the world?
Right. Yeah. And it gets worse in that sense of sentencing, because what happened, I'm not going to go through the whole sentencing, but what they said, what he did, but let's just say this judge, the things that he said to me broke my heart. He was there as a father talking to me, So what happened was he wanted to adjourn it.
The judge wanted to adjourn
Yeah.
it.
So all of a sudden, you can imagine, like, you've gone on, I don't know how long we'd been in there for.
What was the
be
maximum he
honest.
was facing for those charges at that point?
This is why he wanted to adjourn it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what was going on, because you've got a little secretary going, like, trying to type as fast as she could, bless her, and him passing messages here, there and everywhere. And I think what it was is what he said. So he wanted to adjourn it. And I remember the police officers looking at me going, oh no. Like, and I don't know what I did at that moment of time. I don't know whether I cried or I did something at the thought of adjourning it, because it was so intense being in this room. He was talking about adjourning, and all of a sudden, with his, hammer thing, bang, and turn around and goes, I'm not adjourning because of her, and I can't put her through another night of this. That's the only reason I'm not adjourning. And he turned and said, and he looked at him, he said, you've got no remorse. He said, you are a vile human being that has destroyed an innocent childhood and life. And he just said the most beautiful things about me, most horrific things about him. And turned, and do you know what he said? He said, and I've sat here trying to get a sentence that justifies. And you're a very, very lucky man. Because the maximum I can give you is 10 years.
Of which you do half. That's absolutely ridiculous.
With your 221 days of reprimand taken off.
Oh my God. Out in 3 something.
So he actually sat there and said, that's why I wanted to adjourn it, to see what else I could get in terms of sentencing guidelines.
That's what I thought.
But I can't put her through it, and you know yourself that this is historical child abuse. So they got him for the drugs. They got him for forfeiture of equipment, because there was so much equipment involved. I did the list of the sentencing. So they added a little bit on for that, a little bit for the drugs, a little bit for this, a little bit for that, and tried to add as much as they physically could within their power. But actually, I remember the judge turning around and saying to me, forfeiture of all equipment and the diary will never, ever be able to get into anybody's hands. He said, because I don't want it in anyone's hands. Ever. Police, whoever, nobody. Because, and at that point, I never thought I would talk about it. So, I took the anonymity, I took everything, in actual fact, to the point where when I decided to speak out, was they couldn't find nothing on this story. And to the point where my journalist was like, did this actually even take place? It's only because we had to get the authority from the judge, for the to waive my anonymity, that actually she was like, oh, it did exist then, but you couldn't find nothing on it, Shaun. You can't find any of the information requests, nothing.
Did you ever access the letter he wrote to the judge?
No, everything was taken, everything was done for forfeiture. So he was sentenced to 10 years, yeah.
Pathetic.
Yeah.
If people watching this work in the system and you aren't convinced now that it's upside down, I just urge people in the system to take this to heart, because you're the ones who can lobby the people at the top to make these changes.
Yeah.
There are so many good people working in the system. You said about the good judge, good cops, good prosecutors, trapped in this system whereby this guy who deserved life, who just made a mockery, who God knows what he's put in that letter to the judge, just made him, just probably did that knowing that he was going to walk, basically, after 3 more something years.
Well, he walked after 6.
6.
And the reason he walked after 6 is because 2015, 16 and 17, 3 paroles, they refused outright. Because he had not rehabilitated, he was too high risk.
So he learned to pretend, he learned how to play the system there eventually.
Oh, he played the system very well. That's why I ended up speaking out. Because he played the system so well that the system is what created my speaking out. And do you know why? Because whilst he was in prison, he was still getting cards to my son birthday cards, etc., which he wasn't allowed to. So he still had, he knew the system very well.
Did he have rapists delivering those?
No, they were just being put in the post. But how they were getting in the post when he wasn't allowed access to anything. Anyway, so parole's coming up. I'm trying to rebuild my life. I've moved different places. I've changed my name. Everything in my life has become different. I've moved out of the country. I've moved back into the country. And I start obviously working with victims of abuse, sexual violence. And I'm working really hard and I don't get paid for what I do. You know, the standard, typical, you know, but nobody knew why I did what I did. And I became very popular very quickly because I was very passionate and I knew what I was doing and I was, you know, lived experience, but nobody knew I was lived experience. And then 2050, there was no real protection for me as a victim, to be honest. And because of who I am, I managed to protect myself in many ways. My victim support officer, it was only me getting in contact with them 2 years later saying, where have you been for the last 2 years? Do you want to let me know about my father? Because I think we're coming up for parole now, aren't we? And them going, oh my God, has nobody ever been in touch with you? No. Oh my God, emergency, getting someone to then come and visit me, you know, and I'm having to chase them, you know, like, you know, we're in 2014 now. I think next year, maybe we're up for something. Anyway, parole came, was refused. Oh no, and I remember just before this happened, before even a year before, no, 1 year after I think he'd been sentenced, 2012, 2013, my granddad passed away. And I had no intention to go to the funeral. I disconnected in 2013 from every part of that family altogether. And I remember getting the phone call from the prison and saying, or probation, whoever it was, saying, are you planning to go to the funeral? Because your father would like to go. But obviously we need to know whether you're going to be there. So I was like, he can go. I'm not going. So the next thing I know, I'm getting family members threatening me, threatening to you know, come to my home. And I'm like, what are these threats for? And they're like, you've stopped, I hope you can live with yourself that you've stopped your father from going and saying goodbye to his father. And I'm like, I haven't stopped nothing. I've told him he can go. So then probation called me back because I'm ringing them, the police, saying, why am I getting threats from family members? I've authorised it. And they're like, we ain't letting him out, even to go and visit. That's how he was. We're not letting him even go to the funeral. We are not allowing it.
Good.
Because there's stuff that he does inside these cells that we know we can't trust him to be at that funeral.
What's he doing in the cells?
Who knows? So parole comes around 2015, 2016, 2017. 3 paroles, outright no. Now, I'm not, you know, I'm not a police probation, don't work in the prison system, but I'm kind of assuming after my research that if you don't get authorised for parole, that's because you're not really a good man, right? Yeah. Or you haven't been a good man in prison. You know your stuff, Shaun. I'm kind of guessing that.
Yeah, you've got to go do the courses, not get disciplinary tickets, behave yourself, and show remorse, and get up and learn to. You've seen Shawshank Redemption where they won't let him out year after year. Yeah. You got to show remorse.
You've got to show that you're, I guess, safe enough to come up for and coming out.
I imagine
right?
there's certain courses sex offenders have got to do and comply with this shit. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, we get to 2017, 2018, and I get the phone call. And they say to me, we're really sorry. His release is imminent. Now, during this time of the parole, they'd put protection on us. So we were living in Wales, in Swansea. We'd moved over there and they could protect the border. So obviously his licensing conditions when he was coming out was he can't. Originally they were just going to try and protect a local area, but they'd actually got the whole of Wales approved. So he couldn't even cross the border.
Good.
He couldn't even get into Wales, which was fantastic. But they said, oh, so his release is imminent and, you know, you'll have 6 months. I said, so after 6 months, how are you going to protect me? Because 6 months isn't a very long time. Right? He's already done 6 years and that's just flown by.
This is someone who's spent his life coming up with clever ways to do horrendous things to you.
Right? And had now, Shaun, spent 6 years in a cell as an unfiltered man, coming up with God knows what, with plenty of time on his hands, mixing with plenty of people.
Other sexual deviants.
Was now coming out And actually, I felt more unsafe than I did when I was being abused by him. Because at least when he was in my life, I knew where he was. I knew he was around the corner. I knew certain levels of him. I knew that he was still trying to care for me in his own manipulative, weird way. Now this man's coming out completely unfiltered. And who is he? Actually, who is he now? Because I don't know. And I don't know what kind of, person he's become. And I remember my victim's daughter saying, well, he'd probably just sit and have his roast dinner on a Sunday. Really? Like he used to do back before when he was fitting the light sockets and fitting the transmitters. He'd just sit and have his Sunday roast dinner now. He's missed life. This is the mentality that you're dealing with, Anyhow, I just got ready for his release. And I don't know what came over me because I've never Googled his name in the whole 6 years he'd been in prison. Never even tried to find out his prison number. I'd never tried to do anything. And all of a sudden, I Googled his name. And beyond me, his name comes straight up the top of Google. And it says, he says his name, and then it said, been set on fire in prison.
He'd been set on fire.
No, his name was involved in the name at the top in the headline. And I'm thinking, oh my God. I actually then thinking, how's he coming out if he's been set on fire in prison? So I've opened it. It's on the Chronicle, on the Chronicle, which has now been removed, funny enough, because I went out on a massive campaign about it, because this is how the story got out. So I'm reading it, just scrolling down, sweating, thinking, my heart's going, thinking, oh my God, he's dead. And then it says, the person who set himself on fire in prison, my father was the trained Samaritan support listener for him. So my father was giving evidence to how their death come about. You couldn't make it up. You could not make it up. So there's me on the outside world, supporting survivors, supporting victims, working really hard in the third sector charity world, not earning an income, just doing it from passion, lived experience. And I'm not even in the news. Right? I'm not even at the top of Google. And there he was, a trained Samaritan listener in prison as part of the prison project. So he was given his evidence on what had happened when he had spoken to him and etc. Right? So there he was. And again, you cut the cord. As you cut the cord that day with the diary, you cut the cord then. I got in contact with journalists and said, I've got a story. Do you want it? Literally. And then that was it.
What year was that again?
2018.
Wow.
Because he was released in 2018. He was released in May 2018. And I originally hoped my story would go out as he was released the same month. But unfortunately, because there was so much legalities with my anonymity and my judge, that it took much longer for the story to go out. So the story didn't go out until September.
Okay.
So he was released in May and then my story went out in September.
I just need to go back over something that I asked you earlier, because when all the blood ran out of my body and it froze.
And you froze.
When I froze, that's never happened in one of the podcasts before. I literally froze. I believe I was asking you about the initial conversation of when you told your husband about the sexual abuse.
Yeah.
What was that conversation like?
Do you know what? For me, it was fear.
And where were you? Was it over the phone, or were you
No,
with
it was
him?
in Tunisia. It was face to face.
Okay.
And I just stood there, and he's holding on to me, and I'm shaking and screaming, and he's just like, what is it? What is it? It doesn't matter what it is. And I'm, he must have just sensed it.
What point of the story was that? Had you come back from the UK after?
No, this is when we got the phone call.
From the phone call?
Police. From the phone call. He's there. He's in front of me. We're on holiday. He's like, what the heck's going on? And that's when I just stood there and said, he's been arrested. And do you know what? It was interesting because when I talked to my husband about it afterwards, he said, I said to him, you didn't react the way I was expecting you to react, like freaked out, shocked. He goes, for some reason, it didn't shock me. Like, it shocked me. It hurts me. It pains me. I want to kill him. But because your family situation was so warped and so dysfunctional, it was kind of like, now it all makes sense. You know that missing piece, like me when I went to the...
So what had you actually said to him prior to him saying that?
I just said he's been arrested. He'd abused me as a kid. He'd sexually abused me as a child. So obviously when we were having the discussions leading back to come back to the UK, I was saying to him, he was like... He kind of questioned it, but didn't want to know too much. I think the shock was so imperative, like it was ridiculous. And I just said to him, he was like, do you remember it? I said, I just remember being young. I remember the abuse. I remember what he did. I said, and then as far as I was concerned, for me, it was like when I left the house at 15, that was it. I was free. I said, and then obviously, everybody knew he was a stalker and whatever. And he said, well, yeah, I know all of that part because I've been through it with you and I've watched him beat you and all the rest of it. So yeah, as he turned around and said was, you was an innocent little child, and we've got a child and I couldn't even imagine what you've been through. So he was just my support network. But like I said, to a certain degree, because the more that I found out, so what happened was my husband would come to the family home when the police were raiding and stuff. But when it was stuff like what I've talked to you about with the video and stuff, I wouldn't allow him to come. Because it's not that he didn't want to, it's just because I couldn't cope with it myself. And I'm like, how are you going to cope with this? And actually, my husband was so supportive that after my father had been sentenced, I wanted to rebuild my relationship with my mum. So I asked my husband, can we go and live there? Can we move back in the house so I can be with my mum? And he didn't want to. Obviously, he was like, this is the biggest mistake of our lives. And I was like, I was begging him. I was like, please, I need to rebuild this relationship with mum. This is my only chance. And he goes, all right. So we gave up our house. We were renting anyway. We moved in with mum and within 6 months we were out. Because she had no intention of being the mum that I craved and I loved really. And that's when the pieces really fitted together for me, that everybody had their part to play in it and nobody wanted to accept it.
Did she know everything that had happened?
Yeah.
Doesn't that make her a co-conspirator and liable for some criminal consequence?
It did, but at the time, you see, this is the thing though, Shaun, because at the time when they'd had spoken to her about it, I truly believed that she didn't know. And it was only years and years afterwards, around 2013, when I started to see the coldness in her. And she, and I started to see that actually, I don't know what role you played in this, but you did not protect me.
So I mentioned I work with a guy who goes on the dark web called Ron Swanson. So shout out to him. We usually do a live stream on Friday nights when I'm not on the road. And one of the areas he's explored is pedo parents who have children specifically for these things to happen. Do you believe there was an agreement like that prior?
No, I don't with her. What I believe, based on the letter that I'd found that she had written to him, was that when she started to feel like her love was being lost, that's when she was like, made a sacrifice, basically.
And how old were you at that point, do you know?
No, because the letter was dated, I think, a couple of years after I'd been born and the marriage was breaking down. And all she put in the letter was, please don't ever leave me. And, the letter was so desperate. And the backstory I learned over time, and even through my father, he used to talk to me about this army girl, right, who he was madly in love with. And he'd sit there and say to me, he'd tell me about her.
It's the one that he'd raped?
Yeah. But I just knew her as the army girl. Because that's who he'd, because when when you're kids, you're 16, 17, you think you fall in love with somebody, you go home and you're brokenhearted because you're falling out with your friends or whatever at school. And I remember him sitting there saying to me, telling me about this story, this army girl. I just know her as the army girl. That's who I knew her as. And he was in love with her. And then whatever happened between them, and then he met my mum. And I remember because I used to interrogate so many of my family members during this period of time. I wanted to know everything. I wanted to know how the hell has all this come about. And so much of it that none of you had a clue. You opened the drawer and the drugs were sitting there. When I was sorting out the house after he'd been sentenced, I was finding everything. I was opening the drawer, it was there. I was opening that, I was there. And I was like, you lived with him. You cleaned this house. How do you never see any of this stuff? How did you not know anything? It's not possible, And I spoke to my, a lot of my family members, and one of my family members, she said to me, your mum was so obsessed with your father. She was infatuated by him, and she knew that she could never get the love that he'd had from this, or the love that he'd put onto somebody else.
So he used the army girl to make her jealous.
Yeah.
The story of the army
and then
girl,
there
the
was
fable.
the comment that was made that, and when you were born, he didn't show love for your mum anymore. So me and my mum had this very unloving, cold relationship. And obviously now I know why, because the minute I was born, his love was passed to me. So she felt neglected, pushed out as a mother, and even to, the comment that she made to my husband, which was the turning point for me, why I've had no contact with her since 2013, because she turned around and she goes, just completely naturally turned around and said to my husband, well, how would you feel if you've just found out that she'd had an affair? My husband went crazy. He was like, you've not just found out that your husband has had an affair. You've just found out that your husband has actually abused and raped and done the most disgusting stuff to your daughter. Separate this concept. But she, and sometimes you'd think, is she just so brainwashed by him and manipulated and crazy, or is she actually
soulless?
And that is what she is. And I came to that conclusion in 2013, that actually you are completely soulless.
Whoa.
So he's out now.
All right, before we get to that then, so you had that conversation with him, but you only knew so much at that point.
Yeah.
Did you have to have another conversation with him?
Yeah, we've had loads of conversations. Like I said, I don't go into lots and lots of detail about it, but we have like the basic conversation where he's been supportive, when I've had my breakdowns, when I've struggled.
How did he react when you told him the full extent, when you knew everything?
Yeah, well, that was the thing, you see. When all the drugs and the keys and everything started coming, I think he did what I did and put into some kind of like crime video or film. Do you know what I mean? And just kind of put it all like it was somebody else.
Yeah.
I honestly think that that's the way that we've dealt with it. But then I obviously over the years there's been times where I've had that catch up part.
It's like everyone involved in this has had to compartmentalise.
Yeah.
At some point.
Literally.
It's just so extreme.
Literally kind of, and sometimes quite professionally put it away. Sometimes even when I used to talk about when I first started, when I first went to the journalism, I was like, I've got a story for you. That was like, I remember she had said to me that when she first started to speak to me, I was so cold and short with the answers myself that she couldn't get into me. And it took a long time for me to actually become quite vulnerable about it and quite emotional.
It was too raw. You've gone through various stages.
She
of
was just getting that very like professional format of it. I remember I said to her, look, I don't really need to talk about it. And I actually emailed her with a bullet point so that she could write up the story. And she was like, you're not writing the story for me. I'm the journalist. I need to get I actually wrote this is all you need to write in the story. There's your bullet points. This is the bits that you need to. And she was just like, what? That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Like,
all right, so this is going to piss people off now. So he gets released. So
yeah.
You've got this monster at large. And he's got the support of family members still?
Possibly support of some family members. When he came, he was released. Obviously, I released my story. And I set up 2 campaigns. So I did the first petition, which is still running, over in Wales in the Senate, which is the one that I won the Queen's Award for. So there was one, I set up one that was to get child refuge for victims of child sexual abuse. Like we have domestic violence shelters and refuges, we don't have anything for children to run to. So that was my first campaign, and I took that to the Senate in Wales, in Cardiff, and that's actually still going through at the moment, still in discussion. That's been going through now since 2019. And I set up another petition for sentencing guidelines and how he was out And, it was on my website, set petition saying that sentencing guidelines need to be changed. And also I did another petition because when he was released, he was allowed the knowledge of where I was because of his licensing conditions, and I wasn't allowed the knowledge of where he was.
Broker system.
So, and under Sarah's law, like where you can ring up and find out if somebody's a paedophile or if they've got sex offending behaviour, I wasn't entitled to that because he's my father. I know that he's got sex offending on his record. So I'm not allowed. And because basically I went through every system for 6 months, probation, MAPA, you name it, MACA team, every team and actually the probation officer said to me, I know what you're trying to do. And I know, and I wish I could tell you where the area of his, and you know what? I didn't want it for vigilante, right? And this was my petition that I put to the government, which didn't pass, clearly and obviously. So I didn't do the petition and the campaign, which I'm still running, because I want vigilante movements to find him, right? Which is why they will say that we can't let you know where he is, because the vigilante... I don't want to... I want to know where he is, not his address.
Does he have a new identity now and all that stuff?
I'm assuming he must do.
Did the media originally release his name?
Yes.
Say this is the monster of blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah.
Yeah,
So he
so
had
he
to
would
go into
have-
some kind of protection.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so where he was moved to, he was then moved to somewhere else. So he first came out, was put in like that residential hostel that they go into to build them back into the society, and then he got moved again, right? So I wanted to know his vicinity, yeah? And I would say to probation, I don't want his address and I don't want his postcode, but I want his vicinity. And they'd say to me, Mayor, I know you do, and we know why. However, we can't. And there was no law. I tried every sneaky area, avenue and law. And people will say to me, I still debate with people now, and I'm sure many of you will be thinking, well, yeah, because the vigilante movements, and you want it because you want to go and kill him, you want to attack him, and you want this. No. Do you know what? I genuinely don't. Just the same as if you was to access the law. So you had a concern, right, Shaun, you're living there, you see this guy moving and you think, don't trust him. And he's playing with your kids and he's got a really good bond with your kids and whatever. And you go through the service law and you say, I need information. The police will make a discretion to come to you and give you that information, right? There is a law, okay? It's not accessed and it's probably not used to its best ability. But they won't give you that information because they believe you're going to go on a vigilante against that person. They're doing it because they're like, yeah, you need to keep your children right away from it. So there is a law that, again, like I said, very flawed, but that's not what I'm here to, debate. So you could do that, and the police can use the discretion to give you that information of if he's got sex offending, right? But I'm not allowed, as a victim, to know the area that my father is living in. So it's acceptable that if I decide to get my kids and go to Kent for the day, he could be sitting beside me. So I could go down to the beach, right? Come on, kids. Now, bearing in mind, 2 of my kids don't know who he is, but my first son does know who he is. Yeah. And I'm sure he knows what my kids look like, clearly, because if he stalked me for like a portion of like nearly 30 years of my life, or 20 or however many years of my life, then he knows exactly what my kids look like. He knows exactly where they are. He knows their names. He knows everything about them. So if I was to know that, okay, he is south whatever, I can honestly say I will not take my kids to that area because I'm a mother and I want to protect my children, right? And I don't want his eyes physically on my children. So I'm not out there to go on a vigilante movement and get him killed, I could have done that a long time ago with the work that I'm involved with, But I feel I have a right to know where he's located in the country so that I can make that freedom of choice to not go to that location. Because I don't know what's going to happen. A day maybe or may never happen, because that's why I spoke out, was to protect my children. Because if you can't protect me and you can't tell me where he is, and I'm expected to now, after 6 months licensing conditions, where he can have a normal life and he can even come outside my house if he wanted to, because he's no longer under his licensing conditions, I want my kids and the people to know who he is, because you can't protect me. So he can have access to me and my kids and my life. and my kids are not allowed to stay away from it. You know, like I said, I don't want to be going on down to the beach with my kids and he's sat beside me giving me a wave or trying to talk to my son.
Did he get back with your mum?
Well, who knows, Shaun?
You're not allowed to know that.
Well, throughout the period of when he was sentenced to when he came out, she stayed in that house. She lived in that house and not divorced. Then when he was being released...
Was she visiting him all the time?
I don't know. But for me, because I used to say to her, sell the house, get money, go to France with your sister, have a life, yeah? Just get away. Why would you stay in the same house that had the fitted light bulbs and the transmitters and all that creepiness inside that house? Why would you live inside it and stay inside it? And she never did. The house was actually sold just as he came out.
So he got the money.
Oh, he got the money, yeah. And the house went for a very good amount.
So he's got money. You don't know where he is. He's capable of anything. This is how insane the whole system is.
And I'm supposed to just get on with my life because he's served his time for the crime and sleep at night with 3 kids.
And how does that make your husband feel, knowing that he's out there at large, with money, with resources, capable of anything, and he's extremely clever and calculating?
Do you know what, right, Shaun? I think we both had that fear whilst I was keeping the secret still. Because don't forget, if I hadn't have spoken out and I hadn't have waived my anonymity, he was coming out with nobody knowing anything. He was coming out with money from a house sale, with whatever support was being put in place for him through the prison system, and me still a silent child. So I think that me actually speaking out and making it as viral as I did, a Channel 5 documentary, the press, actually, I like to think is what's kept him away from us. I like to think that's what's done it. I like to think that that's where I took my power back, so that I didn't have to live in fear and not be able to sleep at night, not know if I get in my car and it breaks down that he's going to turn up, because that's the kind of things he used to do. So I'd when I was like 16, I've got my first car, my car would break down and he'd just be magically there to fix my car for me. And then obviously, as I found out from the police, he would set these things up so that I always did need him. You know, there was that level of
he made your car break down.
Yeah. So that I needed to rely on him.
Wow.
Couldn't get a job when I lived in Tuesday. Why? Because he was hacking the email, so that I couldn't get jobs because I needed to rely on him.
It's like obsessive compulsive disorder at like the nth degree, with horrific paedophile. Has he been diagnosed with anything?
No, not from what I'm aware of. It's too clever, Shaun. He was too intelligent.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I never forget when the police officer said to me, if he wasn't who he was, we'd have him.
Yeah.
We'd have him working for us.
Yeah.
She said that mindset.
Surveillance and everything.
Yeah, the mindset was... and that's why, you know, I released the story. I went press. There's a Channel 5 documentary. I'm still to write the book. And that's my closing. That's going to be my closing chapter. I've never written the book. And the book is where I'd go into this kind of detail that I've gone in with you. I haven't gone into this. This is more detail than I've gone into even in other aspects of what I've shared. And that's my closure. But it wouldn't be as a book as like my biography. It would be like a psychological thriller.
Based on things.
Because what I want people who hopefully are watching this to know is that we see child sexual abuse as such a horrific, heinous crime, yeah, and it is. But he, to me, goes beyond that level because there's something up there, you know. And my husband, I remember my husband, not probably about a year ago, saying to me, "Why are you scared of him? Like, I'll kill him if he comes near us. Like, literally, I'll take his life in my own hands if he comes near us." I said to him, "Do you know what?" I said to my husband, I'm not scared of him. He's coming out of prison now at, 69, 70, however old. So I'm not scared of him. I'm scared of this. That's what I was scared of. I was not scared of him physically. I'm scared of this. Because I remember when he was released under his licence conditions, and I remember getting a phone call. Got to love the phone calls from the police and the probation and all those people. Every time I get a phone call, I go, here we go again. And there it was I can't remember who it was, but they called me and they were just like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm good, thank you." And they were like, "Right, kids okay?" "Yeah, kids are fine." "Should I not be okay? Should my kids not be okay?" "No, we're just letting you know that, we're keeping track on your father. We're keeping track on who he's mixing with and this and that. But he has a curfew and hasn't returned yet, but we'll let you know if there's going to be any issues." And at the time I'm thinking, you're calling me on my mobile phone. Could have a gun in the back of my head, and I'm going, "Yep, I'm fine, kids are fine, everything's great." They don't come out and visit you to make sure you're okay. Is everything okay? And I was just like, this is just a whole nother level, And that's when I just went out with the story. I just thought, enough is enough. I can't live like this, And like I said, it's not about, it's more about the calculation. It's about the mindset. It was about the efforts that he went to do what he did. So I focus more on that now than I do of the actual kind of abuse. It's the mindset. I think that that's probably what intrigued me the most. Because, to be honest, Shaun, I was expecting to come home from Tunisia and be like, "Yeah, sorry to hear what you've been through. It's child sexual abuse when you were young, and what do you remember when he's getting sentenced for it?" As probably as cold as that sounds, that's kind of what I was expecting. And then healing and going through my rape and abuse counselling and dealing with my childhood, like that was, I guess, what I had in my mind. And then was just more and all of that stuff. So
I'm sure people watching this are thinking this exact same as me. How can we fix the system? How can we prevent this from happening? I mean, what can people do? I mean, Well,
this is the issue that I have, Shaun, because when I first launched all my petitions and my campaigns, and I was awarded in October 2020 the BEM from the Queen, so the British Empire Medal, for my services to child victims. And when I first launched my campaigns, and I was encouraging women and girls to speak out, but I very rapidly pulled that back, because to speak out, you're not only risking not being believed and all of that stuff that comes with it, you're risking not being protected. And so until we can get movement on, one, the sentencing guidelines, but two, the victim protection, because to be of the mindset that, well, that's it now, he's coming out and he's not going to touch you, or he's not going to come for you, he's not going to abuse you, it was historical. I'm sorry, they do not rehabilitate. I don't, that is my personal opinion. And I know, because I've had many discussions with those that work with sex offenders that will say that they run them through programs. But I'm sorry, for me, rehabilitation, it does not work, right?
If that doesn't work, but a life sentence would have worked.
Yeah.
So what is standing in the way?
And how I can't think of the word, but how tricking is it to sit in court and hear 10 years?
And a judge say, "My hands are tied."
But we hear, as a victim, 10 years. What we don't hear is actually he'll serve half, 221 days of reprimand taken off because he's been in da-da-da. So actually he'll be out in. We don't hear that bit. So you have a false sense of hope to rebuild your life in 10 years. But actually, I was fortunate because they kept him longer than that half of that sentence because of whatever he was up to in there, and not meeting the parole conditions. But for many, many victims, they'll hear 6 years, and like you said, that they'll be serving 2.
So throughout this whole chain of events then, it seems a major problem is the judge's hands being tied. How do we untie the judge's hands? What's got to change?
It's getting the knowledge into child sexual abuse, because so many judges are not even trauma informed. So when we look at trauma and, a victim's going to not have that memory of what happened, or she's going to piece it together slightly different, she's then, if there isn't evidence, obviously you've got to take away my story, because my story was full of evidence. It's very, very rare, isn't it, that you get a child sexual abuse victim that's got evidence.
All the documentation.
Right? Very often it's something gets said, something gets happened, and it's her word against whoever's done it. Yeah, so then they have to go through a trial, like you said. They have to go through a trial. They have to go through that humiliation. Now, if they sat there like me, trying to piece it all together and trying to work it all out, and had I have gone through a trial where I'm trying to remember, well, actually, I can't remember him doing that, but I remember him doing that. I can't remember that because, like you said, you've gone into survival mode. Mind and body have been detached. Now you're seeing a normalisation of sex offenders, right? But you're seeing the disregard for victims speaking out, right? So if you pick up a newspaper now and you see on the front page, sex offender, I saw it this morning just while I was sitting here waiting for you, Shaun, sex offender just resentenced or whatever for 5 years, 4 years, right? We go, oh God, another one. Not another one. So we've become so normalised to sex offenders and paedophiles. Yet I walk into a room, and because I've got so used to talking about my story now, but trust me, it was never like this before. I was the silenced child. I'll say, let's have the small talk. Yeah, let's talk about my story. Let's talk about child abuse. And they will go, oh my God, did she just like, people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear about it. And they don't want to lower the mood of the conversation. It's not a conversation, but it's okay to pick up a newspaper and see that somebody's a paedophile, somebody's a sex offender, somebody's just been sentenced. So
you're saying that we can't? It's the system,
but it's also the way that we're normalising it.
It's so dark. Society doesn't want to look at it, so it can't be fixed because we have to look at it properly to fix it. Is that what you're saying? We have
to have general, like this, platform open conversations where we're not shocked that, oh my God, she's actually talking about that story. The more that we can talk about and utilise platforms for victims and survivors, the more normal that will become, and the more shocking it will become when someone's being sentenced to just 3 years for raping or abusing children.
Because the more normalised, there should be people on the street outside those courts saying, right, life sentence, life sentence, life sentence.
Because what we've done is we have sat back and we've got so used to, oh, he's just got 3 years for abusing that child. Oh, he's just got 3 years for murdering and sexually, assaulting that child. Oh, 3 years. Nobody's going, that's an absolute outrage, like you just said, that needs to be stopped. What on earth are we living? But yet for me to speak out, I had to prepare myself mentally for months. Do you know why? Because I was scared of being shamed. I was scared of the stigma. I was scared that professionally I wouldn't be, seen as a professional, which actually happened because I was now seen as a service user. So I had, as a victim, all of that to consider just to speak out and share a story that should be having an emotional reaction for people and getting that movement behind it, rather than you reading in the newspaper that someone's been, done for paedophilia and you just go, oh, God, another one. It's completely warped. We've crossed the lines that I'm walking around with the stigma and the shame because I've spoken out about it, and yet my father's walking around living his life doing whatever he's doing, and I'm still holding on to his sentence. I've got his life sentence. He hasn't got it. I'm sure he's not sitting there crying at night over his dinner, worried about his kids.
And is it this massive injustice that persists whereby these monsters are getting slaps on the wrist and they're getting their lives right back after a couple of years?
But they get their identity changed, like you said. They get protected. He gets supported housing. When he first came out, he got moved to an area where I have no idea where he is.
Sometimes they get on canal boats, according to one ex-cop in London, and they just move around jurisdictions. So they got so many days to register if you're a sex offender. They just move to a new...
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. After the licensing conditions came to an end... don't forget, his sentence is 2021. That's when it ends. We're in 2021 now. He's been out since 2018. He's served from 2018 to 2021 the remainder of his sentence out in society. He should still be in prison.
Do you think, then, that it's this massive injustice that has led to the rise of the vigilante groups?
Well, again, see, this is where you have the issues, because the vigilante groups are doing what they're meant to be doing, but at the same time it hinders, doesn't it, the prosecutions. So sometimes it actually hinders, this is why I get women saying to me, I want to name and shame. I'm like, not yet. Don't do it yet. Because if you name and start shaming before you've actually been to sentencing, then it can actually affect the sentencing, And we've had cases where the paedophile and the sex offender has sued them for slander and libel and different things because there was never any lead up to the sentencing, it was NFA'd, etc. So you have to be very careful. And this is where, the vigilante thing, it's like, I get it, but at the same time, it's a massive flaw, isn't it? Because, I look back now and I think, had I have known, 10 years ago that I was going to speak out, would I have even taken the initiative? Would I have spoken out there and then, But I was pushed to a point where I had to, because of the system, because he was trained as a Samaritan worker. And don't forget that 1 week before that, I'd sat in the Samaritan's office talking about my work with victims. And at the same time, the same organisation are doing prison projects, which, again, I'm not here to say whether that's right or wrong. But on the counterbalancing of who's suffering the most, it doesn't make sense.
So another option we've been discussing on this channel is chemical castration. So let's hypothetically go back in time and say, all right, he did this thing.
Absolutely, chemical castration. Absolutely.
Army girl, as he phrased, that he raped that person, actually. Imagine if he'd have been chemically castrated at that point. Perhaps this would not have happened.
Absolutely. And I still believe that is the only option, Shaun, because the urges and that need, okay, for my father in particular, we're not talking about that mindset, but we're still talking about the perversion that he's got. There would be times where, I'd walk down the stairs and he's masturbating to watching a porno film sitting in the front room. Do you know what I mean? And you're a kid walking around, they don't, there's not that level of dignity. Of course, it doesn't even exist, does it? So yeah, absolutely. What other option do people have?
And would your mum be in the room when he was doing stuff like that?
No.
So, we've got this mission then, get these resources and go after the predators. So we need to be lobbying then for longer sentences, life sentences.
Massively.
The judges' hands have got to be untied. We need to explore chemical castration. Have you got? We need obviously far more protection for the survivors. Have you got any other?
And we need to continue the child refuge, because do you know why that's not gone through?
Why?
And why it wasn't approved straight? Why we've never been able to really get a child refuge? Because one, they say that it can't be a protected space. So how comes a domestic violence survivor can go to a women's refuge and it'll be a protected space, right? You still run a risk of the perpetrator looking for her. So the big organisations, again, which are also very flawed, had turned and said, if you put young kids or have a place where they can go to as in a refuge, then you're allowing paedophiles to be able to navigate towards them. There is no logic in that for me at all, because that's why then have we got domestic violence shelters for women, but we can't have child sexual abuse shelters for kids.
Are domestic violence centres for women run by women?
Yes.
So you'd have the same for kids.
Yeah.
But most paedophiles are men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the statistics. Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't forget as well, Shaun, that the signs and symptoms of children are being missed. Okay, they're just naughty kids at school. They're kids that are getting excluded. They're kids that have concentration problems. They're kids that have learning disabilities. They're kids that have ADHD. They're not kids that are being recognised for the signs and symptoms of what's happening in their household, right? So we've got that other issue. Now, as like myself, which is why my child house petition only got 200 signatures. But it got pushed through and it's still being discussed today. Why? Because the person who took that petition from me invited me in to ask me, what is this that I'm doing? Why am I so passionate about it? And I told him my story and they passed it through and it got passed in motion in the Senate last year.
Brilliant.
Right? With just 200 signatures. Nothing gets done with 200 signatures, right? But it's because you've only got to understand the concept and the logic behind it and turn around going, why have we not done this for years? Right? Because the most common thing that a child's going to do is try and run away. Right? Now, I ran away when I was very young, and I remember it very well because I remember sitting on the train, bunked the train ticket, and I remember the train officer coming over saying, "Where's your train ticket?" Didn't get it. Young girl, please get me, hand me back to my family. Right? Because I'm not going to disclose. Now, we've got lots of NSPCC posters everywhere for Child Helpline. Where can they go? It's not just about making a phone call. Where can they physically go? There is nowhere physically for them to go. So I'm not discrediting the phone lines and the helplines, but where are the kids going to go? You're going to make a safeguarding call. So you're going to get the social services or the safeguarding team involved who are going to go to the house to speak to the parents, the same parents that are sexually abusing them. Then the child's going to be in fear. If you've got enough evidence, you're going to remove the child. But that's very, very uncommon. Because if it was so common that there was evidence laying around the house, then we wouldn't have paedophiles anyway. And if the sentencing guidelines were so strong, paedophiles wouldn't be acting the way that they're acting now, because I do believe that now they have more access to do what they do with less comeback.
We've had guests.
If you, I'm sorry, Shaun, but if you look at someone and you read in there, oh, he got 3 years for paedophilia. Oh, he didn't get much, did he? And you're a paedophile.
No deterrent.
It's that ideal Asian again,
deterrent.
isn't it?
We've had guests come on and say paedophiles join the church because they know they're going to get the high-priced lawyers are going to come in and they're going to get them very light sentences. That's how out of control it is.
Yeah.
And it's sad as well because a lot of kids, when they get removed from the families, then they get abused in care.
Yes, that's the next thing that you've got. That's the next thing that you've got. Exactly.
If you get out of the chip pan into the frying pan.
Yeah, and that's the other issue that you've got is that where can children go that are actually safe, you know, and how do they even know where to go?
Because then you get the predators joining social services to access those kids.
Yeah, as you do in schools with teachers.
Yeah.
Massive institutional abuse, isn't it? It's massive at the moment.
And what ends up happening? It's a bad thing. Criminality in prison. Nearly everyone in prison has been abused as a kid.
Yeah.
So then they get on drugs because they got no way to deal with the trauma.
Yeah.
And then to finance the drugs, the men go into thieving and drug dealing, and the women go into sex work.
Exactly.
We just see it over and over and over again.
Yeah. And do you know what, Shaun? I cannot tell you the amount of people who have interviewed me and gone, so have you ever done sex work? And I say, no. Never begun a drug. You're not a drug addict? No. How the hell are you lying? What did you do then? Right? How are you still standing? Because they're and this is the issue, isn't it? Because
you met a good man early on.
Exactly. And also statistics. I grew up saying no matter what, I will make sure I have a career. I'll make sure I do good in my life. But statistics, they wanted me to be another number. And that's the other issue we've got. So when we look at homeless people on the streets, we just write them off, you know? And we're so quick to say to people, you know, what's wrong with you, but not what's happened to you.
Yes.
What's wrong with you? Why you end up on the streets? Why are you a drug addict? What's wrong with you? But not what's happened to you. Because I could have been there. I could have been one of them, you know? I'm not saying I'm any better because I've had my struggles. You know, my issue was with anger, you know, and it could have landed me in very dangerous places, you know, being violent myself and being angry with the world. But we are not looking. We're not looking where we're supposed to be looking.
And we're kind of conditioned from childhood. You know, my interpretation of a drug user was a heroin addict, lives under a bridge, goes out stealing, thieving. And I did watch this TED Talk where it showed all these pictures of these kids, girls who'd gone missing. And, you know, the whole audience was like oohing and ahhing and say, how can we help them? And then in the same talk, she showed mugshots of these women who'd been stealing and doing sex work and drug addiction, and the audience was repulsed, thinking, these are all criminals.
Yep.
And then she says, guess what?
Yeah.
They're the same people.
This is exactly it, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is when we
hatred of sex workers and all.
Yeah. But also when we look at child sexual abuse victims, survivors, whatever you want to call us, they look at us as an adult. And it's like, if you was to put up, like, let's say we did a display in Liverpool of hundreds and thousands of kid pictures with their stories behind them, you're going to have emotional reaction, right?
Yeah.
But when I'm sitting here talking, you're looking at me as an adult. You're not looking at me as that one that if you now was to Google me, you'd see the picture that I was talking about. And then you'll be, oh my God. So this is the other issue, because survivors and victims don't speak out as children. They speak out as adults. So when we're even reading the newspapers or the articles about paedophiles and sex offenders, you're not getting the emotional connection to it's a child, because you might see my story in the press and going, oh, but she's an adult.
But you are such a good speaker, and I've never had all my blood leave my body, and I literally turned into an icicle.
I know, I didn't know if it was just because it's cold in
I've never had
it.
that happen before in my life, and I'm desensitized. I've been through a lot. But
You're traumatized.
You are powerful. You are a powerful
Thank you.
speaker, and I'm sure the people watching this are just on the edge of their seats, thinking, "What an amazing warrior spirit you've got to go through this." And just the way you took it head on, and you insisted on looking at the evidence, and you insisted on going to the media. You just took it to the next level of bravery, where some people would be just like, I just want to get this behind me. I don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. And to go out there now and to be the spearhead, to be the face, to be campaigning to get these things passed. So we're going to put all your links in the description box below the video.
Yeah.
How can people help you? What's ongoing now for you?
I think ongoing, actually, Shaun, is trying to get more support, just more movement, just more emotional connection. Like you said, you don't see, I don't know, you just don't see anything. You just hear about the paedophiles, hear about the paedophiles, until in the end, you don't even care about the paedophile anymore. You're just sick of hearing about him. So I don't know the next step. I wish I knew. I don't know if it's more journalism going into that. Like you said, like the sex workers, having more interviews and actually getting their backstories and knowing more about it and getting more out there on that level, because I'm sick of opening a newspaper and reading about paedophile. I'm fed up with it. Absolutely fed up with it. So we become desensitized and immune to it. So I don't know what the next step is. Love to hear from people, as well also. Where do we go from here?
So with our mission then, and to end the war on drugs and put the resources into going after predators, it was the American public that have got weed decriminalised and legalised. That's the people. They're sick of their kids getting pulled over by the cops, thrown in prisons where they become heroin users and neo-Nazis just for weed possession, which was the highest arrest category under the war on drugs. It was almost 1 million arrests a year for weed possession. The American public is sick of that. So they have forced the government at the state level to reverse those laws. Now, we know all politicians care about is votes.
Yeah.
So for years, politicians had to be tough on crime, lock people up for weed. This is financing narco-terrorism, from Reagan onwards. Even though they've done coke and they've done weed, all these politicians, they've had to pretend this is heinous, throw people away, lock the key up and stuff. So pressure has got to be put on politicians. They've got to realise they're going to lose votes if they keep letting these sick bastards out of prison after only a couple of years. They've got to lose votes,
and
if
we
they
have
keep
to
doing
stop
that.
desensitizing people towards paedophilia.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, there's a propaganda. There's an agenda behind it. The fact that, is it actually media just news reporting the local the paedophilia? Because actually, we're becoming very immune to it. We don't even, like once upon a time, if you'd heard a story about a paedophile, you probably would have been absolutely sickened and outraged and disgusted. Now you're just like, another one.
Yeah.
It's just another one.
It's just an epidemic.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
And like I said, I don't know if that's coming from the fact that, when we speak about it, it's so shocking, and we're the ones that walk around with the stigma and the shame, and they're just walking around with their faces sprawled all over the papers and they don't give a damn.
But look at the cost to society then of this. I mean, if politicians care about the taxpayers' resources one bit, that kid then who suffers that abuse, who gets into criminality, some of them I've interviewed on this channel, and that criminality has been big time, and it's stemmed from
Abuse.
And that criminality has cost society an absolute fortune. Housing these people in prison then, you know, £60,000 a year or whatever it is, has cost the taxpayers an absolute fortune. And then it's just, the effects just spread out like this.
It's massive. It's a massive issue on society.
You've got one predator, with some of them have hundreds of victims.
Yeah.
So that's costing probably tens of millions, when that could have been stopped by chemical castration or a life sentence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's it. Talking to you today, that's it. We're going to have to start campaigning for these things.
Yeah, and we need more people behind it because, like I said, 221 signatures on a petition.
Pathetic.
And is that because people are they're scared to get involved in it, or they are desensitised from it? I don't know.
And I think from what you pointed out, it's the darkness. They're looking at the darkness. It makes them feel ill. They walk away from it.
Yeah. Or maybe they're looking at you now as an adult and not as a child.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure if you was to interview, a 6 or 7 or 8, 9-year-old, it would be a completely different story. The whole world would be in uproar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we're not getting, like you said, there's something missing. There's something missing when it comes to child sexual abuse, and I'm not like I said, I'd never devalue anybody's abuse or what everybody's suffered from. I work with everybody from all forms of trauma, but for some, there's child sexual abuse is just not on the agenda. Child sexual exploitation and trafficking and domestic violence, it's all there, it's all out there, and then this CSA just sort of sits there with maybe a little push every now and then.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, why is that?
Are you connected with any other people then who are campaigning for this?
Not really. There was a few people that have been out and worked really hard, and we just don't get anywhere with child sexual abuse, and especially, Shaun, with family. It's what they call familial child sexual abuse. We've got these pushes on grooming gangs and, the rapes and the exploitation.
Yeah, we've had Maggie Oliver on with the grooming gangs.
Oliver with the grooming.
What about John Wedge? Have you ever connected with him?
I've spoken to John Wedger.
Yeah, he's done some good work, yeah.
But it's like the family side of things, and we had that big push on the with the religious abuse, child sexual abuse, but like you say, with the priests and the Catholics and all of that, and we've had the institutional abuse. But why are we not addressing your father and your mother and your brother and your sister?
It most commonly is somebody that you know, a family member, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, or your uncle.
And they say also, out of all the drugs, alcohol is the number one that's involved in all sex crimes.
Yeah.
Did alcohol play its role in your case?
No, the drugs.
It was just pure drugs.
Yeah.
Okay. So what social media are you active on? We're going to put all the links in the description box.
So social media, very active on Facebook and Instagram. A little bit on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I've just started my YouTube. I just need to push my YouTube out there. So I've just started doing my YouTube for my story.
This is going to push it out there.
Good.
Yeah.
Because I've been focusing before on my YouTube with just like my trauma work, but now I've started to become talking about my story.
Yeah.
So I've got like a playlist for my story so people can get into that. Because again, it takes a long time to actually even use the word child sexual abuse, because you wait for the shock reaction. You wait for the person to go, I'm
going to urge people to subscribe to your channel. I'm going to make sure that's near the top of the description box, because you are an absolute warrior at the forefront of this. And we need to, yes. So are there any campaigns you need people to sign anything for right now, or is that done?
That's done. We're just waiting now. I'm waiting very patiently to find out if the child victim refuge, like the what I'd applied for, is just going to be scrapped. And then if that is, I'm going to go back on a push of that. And get that back out there, because until we actually start making it a conversation for children to feel like that secret and that silence, can be helped, you're not going to get children talking about it. You're never going to get children talking about it. And until, and then we need more push on working with, I keep going on about schools and working with trauma-informed information. PTSD, we associate it with war veteran. The most common is child sexual abuse and sexual violence, that people are suffering with PTSD. And yet we use the word PTSD and we're thinking back at, war veterans. We should be using PTSD and thinking child sexual abuse, rape, and that kind of trauma. So we need to be, again, opening all organisations and all schools into trauma-informed. And not trauma-informed from just mental health and stress, trauma-informed from child sexual abuse, sexual violence, and, no longer trying to cover the words up and say it quietly. So can we talk about child sexual abuse today? Can we talk about child sexual abuse? Can we use the words vagina and penis to our children so that they understand, if they do need to disclose, that they're not saying down there? My uncle touched me down there. No, my uncle touched my penis. My uncle touched my vagina. I don't know whether it's a very English thing where we like to say
English reservedness.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Where we try to be like, don't say that, but we have to.
So do you want me to connect you with other big podcasters? Would you want to keep telling your story and reaching, getting this to a bigger audience?
Yeah, it'd be brilliant.
You talked about, doing the push. For you to do your push, you need resources.
Yeah.
Do you have like a donation thing set up in any way?
Yeah, I do on my website. So on my website, we've been taking the donations. That's how we got a push for the...
Is it like a GoFundMe or anything like that? What?
We did have a GoFundMe, but we stopped that when the campaign actually went in for the petition. So now it's because I run a free monthly child sexual abuse women's circle support group. So I'm doing a lot of that for free. So every now and then we will get donations from organisations that have heard about us and say, right, put that towards, the free support groups that we provide. Because the problem is, when we've got a topic like child sexual abuse, you can't go charging. You can't go charging people to provide therapy. I told you about some of the kids that I'm working with in schools at the moment, and I'm offering them free support and free therapy because we just cannot. We're just not in a position where the fact that there is no government push to address these issues, to be expecting family members to get their kids help or to get their kids support or for people to start speaking out. We've got to be out there on the ground doing it ourselves.
So the link on your website then, is that like a PayPal thing, or how do people donate through your website? Yeah,
just go through PayPal.
It's a PayPal thing.
We've got the GoFundMe, but we've closed that down at the moment just because we're waiting to find out how much we're going to need on the push if the child victim.
You might want to reopen that, because what I found is the more options people have to donate, the better, because some might say, I don't do PayPal.
Yeah, and I just don't like taking donations. That's my problem.
Yeah. But people could see you're a genuine...
That's my problem, because I'm like, it's all right, I'll just get on with it.
People could see what a genuine soul you are.
I do it because I love it.
Some people are going to want to donate.
Same when I run the monthly group for the women's circle, and obviously they can book through Eventbrite on the ticket list. So if there's anybody that's is actually triggered or feeling like they need to speak out because they've come across this and they're like, I've been through that. We do run that, monthly support group. You could book through Eventbrite. And everyone keeps saying to me, you need to put it as a donation. Stop putting it as free. Just put it as a donation. And I'm like, no, I can't. But I will be changing that too, because, people that get that support actually want to give. They genuinely want to give.
People watching this are going, I want to. I want to.
Yeah, they do like to give because, it's just one of those subjects. I remember when I first spoke out, and we had a lovely a company over in Wales, and they came and gave us a nice big check, and it was just things like that, because it just, like you said, it can touch the hearts. But for me, it's actually about trying to get more grassroots, and I'm not like, we can do some work to that, maybe Shaun, together. It's like, how do we get more grassroots on this subject?
Yeah. Well, I would love to get you back on. I could just feel the blood coming back into my body right now. It was like a vampire entered the room and just... I think perhaps it was the evil spirit of this bastard.
I know. That's me talking about that weirdness that went on for years, where I wasn't spiritually connected, and now I'm spiritually connected. Now I'm like, wow, there was so much like that was signs, and I never saw them.
So we're almost at 3 hours.
No.
Yeah. How long did you think you'd been speaking for?
About an hour.
Yeah, it goes fast, doesn't it?
But that's what I'd planned in my head. I was on my drive up here. I was like, right, 1 hour.
Yeah.
1 hour with Shaun will be enough. Wow.
What do you want to say in conclusion then to the people watching this?
Well, like I said, first of all, thank you for even watching it. If you're going to be watching it, please just make us more normal. Honestly, that's the only thing at the moment I want to push out there is, we have to break this. As we grow up as children believing we are dirty, we are shameful, we are disgusting, and we have a secret that, all the campaigns that you'll see is like a kid covering their mouth on child sex abuse, silence, you'll see all of that. So that is genuinely how we feel. Very dirty, very shameful, that we don't deserve to have husbands and kids and families and lives, And I think the more that we can, gather together, get more victims who are ready to talk out, to speak out, to build that movement, that is literally what people need to be helping us with, because that is what's going to make the difference between paedophiles being as confident to do what they do. And like I said, when I said to I forgot to say it to you, Shaun, I said to the police officer, did he want to be caught? That's what I said. I said, he must have wanted to be caught because he left it all around. And she said, no. Over years, he was confident he would never be caught.
Wow. What a powerful story and what a powerful way to end this. I mean, this has got to be one of the most emotional and spine-chilling podcasts we've ever done. And May, you're just so absolutely brave. I just can imagine the people watching this, how they feel right now. So please go down, at the very least, subscribe to Maya's channel. Otherwise, check her links out. There's going to be ways to contact her, and you can always chip in, making a donation on the website. So if you've managed to stick around and watch this whole thing, power to you. I hope you sleep okay tonight. And huge thank you to all the new subscribers. Subscription logos in the bottom corner of the screen. And huge thank you to everyone who's supporting our channel mission, because it is just raising the awareness to the public of these things that society doesn't want to look at, that is going to cause enough people eventually to rise up and force these plastic-faced puppet politicians to be scared finally. If they don't make some changes, they're going to lose some votes, because that's the bottom line, I think, when it comes to government policy. And so all of you people working in the system, and people approach me and come up and say, look, I am in the system, I totally agree with you, but I'm trapped, I can't make these changes. You people in the system have got to step up and lobby your bosses and say, I joined to do this work because of these reasons, and yet I'm getting told to do these other things that I don't think, my heart is telling me this is the right direction we should be going in here. And if enough of you in the system can affect changes from within, that is a way we can expand our mission as well. So, oh my goodness, what a bloody journey! Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, brilliant,
Thanks, Shaun.
absolutely brilliant.